3 days after we buried my wife, I was still in the same black coat, faintly scented with lilies from the funeral. I stood by the window watching the lake freeze when the phone rang. My son Jason skipped condolences dad sell the lake house. Prices are high. 3 days later, my daughter Megan called. Same tone. Move into my basement. We'll get a great offer for the house. 1 week. 2 calls. Both were talking about my home as if I were already gone. I didn't argue. I just looked at the ice and thought, you have no idea what game you've started. Because hidden in this house is a secret my wife left me, one that would shatter their plans. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I kept the coat on after I hung up even though the kitchen was warm and the old baseboards clicked as they expanded. The coat had a weight that felt useful. If grief has gravity, the coat gave it a place to land. I could still smell the lilies if I lifted the collar to my face, clean, waxy, a sweetness that didn't belong in winter. On the sill, a ring of frost had crept in under the bad caulk I always promised to redo in the spring and never did. Helen used to say that was the charm of this place. There was always something to fix and therefore always a reason to stay. The wind pushed a pale scud of snow along the lake's surface. From a distance, the ice looked solid, but I knew it wasn't. There were darker seams cutting through the white like veins. Step wrong, and you'd learn which lines were surface and which were truth. I tapped the glass with my knuckle, once a habit of men who prefer to make sure reality is still there. Jason's call had come on a Tuesday at 9:14 a.m. I remember because Helen's kitchen clock with its cream enamel and a hairline crack across the two was always 4 minutes slow, and I'd gotten used to adding that back. Dad sell the lake house. Prices are high. He'd said it plainly, like reporting the weather. He has a realtor's voice now, even when he's talking to his father, unbothered, confident, built to convince. When he was 12 and his baseball team lost in the semifinals, he cried so hard his shoulders shook. He did not like to lose. He learned to hide the shake. Megan's call came on Friday after work. I could hear her keyboard under her words the way you can hear a subway underneath a city proof of motion no matter what's happening at street level. Move into my basement. We'll get a great offer for the house. She sounded efficient, generous. Move here, Dad. There's a full bath. You'll have a separate entrance. She hung a small chandelier down there, she told me, so it wouldn't feel like a basement. She thought light alone could rename a room. They were not cruel children. That's what makes this sort of thing slippery. Cruelty you can swat away like a fly. They were practical. They had spreadsheets and words like liquidity and resale in their mouths, and they thought practicality was a kindness. Perhaps it is when you're in your 30s and every decision is about acceleration. In your late 60s, you begin to understand that some things are meant to resist acceleration. A house, a marriage, a garden that takes 5 years to learn your hands. I set a mug on the counter and forgot to pour coffee. That's been happening lately. I go through all the motions and the cup remains empty. I meant to change this habit the way I meant to fix the caulk. I rinsed the mug out anyway because some chores are prayers in disguise. On the kitchen table sat the manila folder from the funeral home receipts, the death certificate, and the little pamphlet about grief groups that meet on Tuesdays in a church basement that smells like lemon oil and old coats. I had laid it open with an intention to be thorough and grown up about paperwork. I closed it now and slid it into the drawer with napkin rings and half a deck of cards and the bottle opener shaped like a trout Helen bought for $1 at a church sale because she liked the way its dumb mouth opened the same way for everything. I took the legal pad off the refrigerator and made 3 columns, an old habit from engineering days when bridges were decisions you could calculate. What they know, what they don't, what I want them to think. Under what they know, I wrote Mom is gone. Dad lives alone at the lake. Winter is hard on the old house, 3 lines true enough. Under what they don't, I didn't write anything at first. The pencil hung there above the page like it was waiting for permission. Finally, I wrote, Helen kept her own counsel. Then smaller, so do I. I hovered over what I want them to think and left it blank for now. It isn't that I was planning to manipulate my children. It's that I no longer wish to be an open book written in a language anyone could pronounce. The sunlight in March in Vermont is a blunt instrument. It falls through the big south window and slaps the kitchen table in rectangles. It makes you think things are cleaner than they are until you turn your head and see the dust motes doing their patient dance above the wood. Helen would run a cloth through the air just to mess up their choreography. I used to tell her she couldn't clean the air. She'd say, "Watch me." In the afternoon, I went out to the porch and swept the thin snow off the steps. You don't need to sweep snow, strictly speaking. If the weather is set this way, the wind will do it for you. But sweeping gives a man something to do with his hands while he thinks. Across the lake, the Whitehorn place sat dark. In summer, you can see their kayaks propped by the boathouse and Mrs. Whitehorn's laundry like flags. Sheets, towels, a line of blue shirts her husband wears while he's pretending to retire. The house looked like it was holding its breath the way mine was. I heard tires on the road and did the old man thing of pretending not to look. It was a delivery truck. The driver hopped down left a narrow box next to the mailbox and left without knocking. The box was the right length for a chandelier. I did not pick it up. I went back inside and hung my coat on the peg by the door. The house changed temperature around me as I moved the way a pond ripples when you step into it. I do not believe houses are alive, but I do think they know who has learned their sounds. The radiator in the small bathroom ticks once at 3 p.m. in winter. The dining room window quivers when the wind comes from the west. The second stair from the top will always complain under your left foot more than your right, and you only learn this by living here long enough to stop looking at your feet. That night, I slept in our bed for the first time since Helen died. I had been on the couch in the den with the TV off and the blanket Helen knit for Lily folded over me like a draft notice. The bed held me differently. It is strange to find out that mattresses have a weight memory and that the absence of a person can change the way cotton feels. I lay on my side and put my hand out to where she used to sleep the way men in movies do, and I waited to feel stupid. I did not. What I felt was honest. The sheet was cool. The emptiness was not theatrical. It was geography. In the morning, I made coffee and poured it this time. Progress, as Helen would say, always demands a parade. The phone buzzed with a text from Megan. Hey, Dad. Just checking in. We can start showing the house next week. It's a great time. The basement is 90% ready. Love you. At the end, there was a heart emoji, which is modern shorthand for sincerity. I stared at the little pink heart as if it had teeth. I typed back, "Morning. I'll let you know," and put the phone face down. Jason called at 10:11. His calendar must be a field of tiles he shoves a human life into. Dad. I found a cash buyer, he said. No inspection. They'd want to close fast. This is turning into a maintenance nightmare up there, right? Roof taxes, snow medical. I'm just trying to make this easy. He emphasized the last word like it were a virtue uniquely available through him. It isn't a nightmare, I said. The roof is tight, taxes are paid, and my knees can still find their way up the stairs. Come on, he laughed sharp short. Why fight this? You'll be closer to us. Megan's got the basement, and I can come up weekends. We'll take care of you. I'm not a job, I said. He sighed. You're being stubborn, Dad. Sometimes stubborn is what's left of dignity, I said, and he went quiet in a way that told me I had found the seam I meant to find. He said he had a showing to get to, and we hung up like two people who had failed to convince reality to change its mind. After lunch, I took the broom to the mudroom because it was the sort of chore you can half do while thinking about something else. There's a high shelf in there where we keep picnic blankets and the old tackle box with lures too pretty to use. When Helen showed me where she'd put them, she'd said, "Some things are meant to be pretty and useless, Earl. Let them." We rarely disagreed about categories, but I never liked greed in the garage. I like tools to work even if they're not called upon often. I brought the step stool in and climbed up to wipe the dust off the blankets. A small avalanche of paper fell from the top of the shelf and skittered across the floor. Takeout menus, a faded postcard from a cousin in Arizona, 3 coupons from a grocery store that no longer exists, and a narrow navy envelope that slid farther than the rest and lodged against the baseboard. For a full 10 seconds, I didn't move. Not because of any mystical feeling about an envelope that had chosen me, but because I wanted to watch the moment before I had to name it. The envelope had no return address. It was thick enough to resist bending, and paper that resists bending usually contains a truth someone wanted to be durable. There was a single line on the front in Helen's square, careful hand for Earl. Open when you know why. I crouched there on the mudroom tiles, my knees testifying to every year they have worked for me, and laughed once quietly like a cough. Open when you know why. There are a dozen ways to take that sentence. Helen could tuck a world into 5 words and make me feel like I'd been given a map and a dare at the same time. I did not open it. I put the envelope on the kitchen table and stood over it like a man considering whether to disarm a small bomb or invite it to dinner. The lake made its low winter sound out beyond the glass. I brewed a second cup of coffee, which I rarely do, and did not drink it. The envelope waited. I pressed my palm on it. It was not cold. I slid it under the legal pad and made a new list in a clean block of space. Why would she make me wait to keep me from acting out of anger, to keep me from acting out of fear, to make me notice what matters before I learn what changes? I wrote a notice and underlined it twice. The pencil left a small ridge in the paper that you could feel if you ran your finger along it. I say things like this to my granddaughter Lily when she thinks I am just telling stories about being old. Notice things I tell her and she rolls her eyes and then notices anyway. I left the envelope where it was and took a walk down to the dock. The snow had a thin crust, and each step broke through with a sound like a small apology. At the end of the path, the dock boards were rimmed with rhyme. In summer, the dock is where Helen would sit with her feet in the water and read. She pretended to read the same paragraph for an hour so she could watch dragonflies land on her toes. I stood there a while and let the cold work the way it works on birthstones, insinuating itself into you until you feel cut like glass. I said out loud to nobody I know why, and surprised myself because I did. Back at the house, I took the envelope out and carried it, not opening it, into Helen's little office, the one painted a pale blue she joked was called Better Decisions. The room smells like pencils and lemon oil. Her desk is wide and shallow with a shallow drawer on the right that sticks in winter. She kept a jar of beach glass on the corner because she liked the idea that the sea can polish trash into something you'd put on a windowsill. I sat in her chair and waited until the chair knew my weight again. Then I slid the envelope into the middle of the blotter and looked around the room like the room would look back. Her calendar still hung on the wall, March, staring at me with its grid of days like a field plowed but not planted. She had written small notes in the squares even after the diagnosis, even after her body began breaking its own rules. Call Maria, one square said, with a small wave drawn next to it. Check taxes in another. There was a sticky note on the lamp, change bulb. Too yellow. The woman preferred honest light. It is a kind of courage to demand brightness when everything in you wants to be dim. I didn't touch any of it. I left the envelope there like a guest book you sign later. That evening, the road plow scraped by and left the ridge of gray snow at the end of the drive that I had always hated and always shoveled. I put on Helen's old knit hat that she used to say made me look like a fisherman and went out with the shovel. It felt good to move something that resisted me. Each lift made the neat rectangle of clean edges grow. A car came by and slowed. Joyce, my next-door neighbor, is the sort of woman who has baked more pies than some bakeries. She rolled her window down and leaned. "Earl, honey, go back inside," she said. "You're making the rest of us look bad." She smiled and then sobered. "You need anything, you call me." "I mean it." I told her I would. She has said the same thing for 20 years. I have needed salt and a ladder and a hammer and one time a prayer, and she gave all 4. I slept again in our bed and dreamt of a lemon, not a tree, not a branch. Just a single lemon rolling under my palm on a table somewhere that smelled like salt and clean air. On Sunday, Megan arrived without warning. She does that. It is a habit of hers shared with the weather. She came in knocking as she opened the door, Dad. It's me, and set her sunglasses on the console table like a flag planted in a contested zone. She looked neat in a way that cost money, navy coat, silk scarf, boots without a scuff. When Megan was a girl, she used to sit on our back steps and draw the house from different angles, then bring the drawings inside and ask which one we should frame. "You cannot frame a house you live in," I told her once. "It's meant to change." She didn't like that answer. "Coffee?" I asked. "I'm good," she said, and sat at the kitchen table, crossing one leg over the other like a clause being added. Her eyes moved across the room like she was in an open house checking for the kinds of imperfections buyers would accept. "How are you?" I have never liked that adverb, really. It takes simple answers. Hostage. "I'm okay," I said. "Some hours are longer than others." She nodded like she could put that line in a press release. Then she lifted her chin the way you do when changing registers. "Jason says you're resisting." "I am," I said. "To what end?" she asked, not mean, not even impatient. She genuinely wanted the thesis statement. "To the end where I live in my home," I said, "and nobody lists it without me." She leaned forward, palms on her knees. "Dad, the last time I was here that side door latch stuck." The stairs creaked like they were auditioning for a horror movie. The doc's a lawsuit waiting to happen. What if you fall? What if you slip on the ice? There's work everywhere you look. I could have told her about different kinds of work. The kind that changes a man's sense of himself, and the kind that just moves shovelfuls of snow from one place to another. I could have told her that fear is a terrible architect. Instead, I asked, "Do you remember how to play the first song you learned on the piano?" She blinked. "What does that do you?" I asked. She sighed. "No. Because you never finished learning to play," I said. "You learned to start, and then you got busy." She looked at me for a long time in a way that suggested she had put a weapon down. "Are you calling me a quitter?" "No," I said. "I'm calling you my daughter." She laughed. Then a brittle sound that I still love because I remember what her laugh sounded like before the world asked her to wear armor. She stood and walked to the window and looked out at the lake. "Jason's not wrong about the market," she said. "We could get you a number you'd be proud of." "I'm not interested in numbers I'd be proud of," I said. "I'm interested in a life I recognize." She turned back hands in her coat pockets. "Then promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll tell me if you need help." "I will," I said, which was both true and more complicated than she meant. She kissed my cheek. The scent of her perfume followed her to the door and stayed a moment after she closed it. When she was gone, I went to Helen's office and stood in the doorway as if it were the threshold to some reasonable country. The envelope sat on the desk blotter, obedient. I didn't yet know whether it contained instructions, revelations, or both. I only knew Helen would not have given a command she didn't think I could carry. "Open when you know why." I ran a finger along the envelope's top edge and felt the seam give slightly, then stop. Not yet. That afternoon, Lily called from campus. She has Helen's tendency to land on sentences like birds landing on a fence, lightly ready to lift off if necessary. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." "Here it is," I said, and the relief in her exhale made me realize how often we confuse hearing someone with truly listening to them. She told me about a studio critique, how her professor said her arches were too polite and her curves needed to stop apologizing. "Can curves apologize?" she asked me, laughing into the phone. "They can," I said. Most of the good things in this world spend the first half of their lives apologizing. Mom and Uncle Jason being intense, she asked, not with gossip in mind, but as if she were asking if the weather was going to change and should she bring an umbrella. "A little," I said. "Intense is the modern word for control," she hummed. "You okay there?" "I am," I said, and I'm thinking, "Uh-oh," she said. "That's when things get interesting." "Lily," I said, "if I tell you something later, something you'll have to keep to yourself for a while, do you think you can do that?" "I can," she said, serious suddenly. "I'll guard it like it's the last warm thing in winter." We talked about nothing and everything for 10 more minutes, the cafeteria soup that tried to be chowder and failed, the way the snow piles in Burlington look like strip malls by February, her roommate who loves plants more than people but may be right about both. After we hung up, I sat a long time without moving my hand on the envelope as if it were a stethoscope, and the house was telling me whether it had a heartbeat. Near dusk, I walked the perimeter of the property the way a man walks a fence looking for breaks. The birches had that pale insistence they get in late winter bark peeling back like paper excuses. On the east side of the lot, near the stone wall that pretends it will always stand, I found the small mark Helen had cut into the bark of a sugar maple the year we argued about whether to tap our sap or buy syrup like sane people. The mark had widened with the tree, a soft V. She had told me then, "If we ever get lost up here, look for the V." We used to build our maps out of nonsense. Maybe this is what a marriage is, a set of instructions for a geography no one else has to understand. The moon rose thin and indecisive. I went inside and turned on the lamp in Helen's office, the one that was too yellow. The light made the envelope look warmer than it was. I pulled out the desk chair. Something jammed. I reached under the chair and felt the pebble there. Not a pebble, a button. One of Helen's. Small, mother of pearl, scuffed at the edge. It must have fallen who knows when, and ridden under this chair for how long. I held it in my palm like a coin that had been pressed into service and retired honorably. Time, like grief, is a lousy mathematician. It stretches and stutters and doubles back. I do not know how long I sat in that chair, watching an envelope not move. long enough for the house to accept that I wasn't going to give in to the part of me that likes answers for dessert. When I finally stood, I did it slowly, not because I am fragile, but because the act of standing deserves respect. I slid the envelope back under the legal pad and wrote at the top of a new page, rules. Then I numbered them. 1. Do not act out of panic. 2. Do not explain to people who have not asked a real question. 3. Put everything in writing that needs to be heavy. 4. Find out what Helen meant before I let anyone else tell me what she meant. 5. Keep the house warm. That last one made me laugh. It seemed foolish sentimental. But houses die in the cold. They warp and sulk and punish you with pipes. Keeping a house warm is a way of saying you still belong to someone. Maybe that someone was me. Maybe it was Helen. Maybe it was the vow we made to keep each other's names in our mouths as long as we could say them. The next morning I called the chimney sweep because if I was making lists I could also make appointments. "Earl," he said, "haven't seen you since the fall. People who work with fire like to be remembered." He promised to come on Wednesday. I called the plow guy and told him I'd shovel the ridge myself until the end of the month. "Suit yourself," he said, and added, "My back will send you a card." At noon, an email from Jason. Attaching a letter of intent. Cash offer. Strong terms. No contingencies. You'll be free of responsibility. The words "free of responsibility" floated on the screen like balloons that are never going to burst. I forwarded the attachment to myself and closed the laptop. The kitchen clock ticked its crooked seconds. I wrote a new line under Rule 6. Be boring on paper. Be decisive in person. I made a sandwich. It tasted like cardboard and duty. I ate it anyway because men like me do not skip meals as a strategy. The phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't have saved. "This is Maria. Call me when you're ready." A wave emoji. I stared at the name and the little wave. Helen's March calendar. Call Maria. A wave drawn next to it. Better decisions. I did not call. Not yet. Instead, I pulled down the tin box from the pantry shelf labeled cookies, in a cheerful script that had been lying for a decade. Inside were rubber bands, a tiny Phillips screwdriver, a spare key to the shed, and a Polaroid of Helen at 25 on a beach I didn't recognize. Hair wind-wild, eyes shut against the sun, mouth open, mid-laugh. On the back, in her square hand, "We don't have to deserve joy to accept it." Under that, a small line M. The letter looked like it had been added later with darker ink. Maria, maybe. I put the photo in my shirt pocket and left the tin on the counter like a small evidence locker. The day crept toward evening. The old maple by the road threw a long finger of shadow through the front room across the rug we bought with our first tax refund when buying rugs felt scandalous and adult. I turned on the lamp in the corner and it took a moment to wake. I have always liked that moment, the bulb's small surrender to what it's made to do. I thought again of Jason's phrase, "free of responsibility." Some offers are insults disguised as favors. I am not free from this place. I don't want to be. If I leave someday, it will be because I am going towards something, not because I lost a debate about square footage. After dinner, half a bowl of soup that tasted like water learning manners, I washed the pot and left it to dry on the rack. The noise of a pot dripping is a comfort I have never been able to explain. It tells me work has been done and heat applied and relief is on its way. I wiped the table because Helen would have wanted it wiped. Then I went to the office, sat, and put the envelope in the center of the blotter. I took a breath. Another. When you work on bridges, as long as I did, you learn that some spans are not finished until someone trusts them enough to cross. I slid my finger under the flap and felt the paper give. Only a little. Enough to let air in, not enough to reveal what was inside. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I have been afraid before on scaffolding in the wind that made promises, and in hospital rooms where machines try to bargain. This wasn't fear. It was something cleaner. Anticipation with integrity. I took my hand away and closed the flap again. "Not tonight," I said. I wrote one more line under Rule 7. Choose the hour, or the hour chooses you. Then I turned out the yellow lamp that Helen hated and went to bed. The lemon from my dream rolled once across my palm in the dark, and I could hear the lake trying to remember how to be water again. In the morning, when the light has the decency to be honest, I will open the envelope. But not because anyone told me to. Because I know why. Because I am no longer interested in being handled. Because the house is still warm. And because whatever is written in my wife's square hand will not do the work for me, it will only show me where to begin. The next morning, the light fell through the kitchen window in a way that made the dust in the air look like it had something to say. I poured coffee and stood there not drinking it, letting the steam curl up against my face. Helen used to tell me mornings were the truest version of a person. No audience yet, no corrections made for the benefit of others. Just the unedited self standing barefoot on cold tile. I glanced toward the navy envelope still resting in the middle of her desk in the office. I had not touched it since I set it there, but its presence was louder than any clock in the house. I told myself I'd open it later. Maybe after lunch. Maybe when the house felt more neutral, if such a thing was possible anymore. The thing about living with a woman like Helen for 43 years is that you get used to her leaving breadcrumbs you don't notice until much later. She didn't write, "Remember to check the drawer in winter," or "Look in the shed after the first snow." She preferred the kind of clues that didn't look like clues until you realized she'd been speaking in code for months, sometimes years. She had faith in my patience. Or maybe she had faith that stubbornness in my case could be repurposed into persistence. After breakfast, I went into her office, not to open the envelope, but to sit in her chair and breathe the air of someone who understood me better than I sometimes deserved. The pale blue walls, which she'd named Better Decisions, had faded just slightly near the window. The sun's way of reminding you it keeps its records. On the desk were the neat stacks she favored: bills. Here correspondence, there personal things in a small wooden box that had once held tea. I opened the box. Inside was a mix of the practical and the personal in that way. Helen always seemed to merge them. A packet of stamps, 3 sticks of sealing wax, a faded photo of Lily when she was 6, holding a lopsided snowman, and at the bottom a brass key on a red ribbon. I didn't recognize the key. It was too small for the shed, too ornate for anything modern in this house. Tied to the ribbon was a tag. For the day you need a door no one else can find. I sat back in the chair, the key warm from my hand. My mind moved through the house like water through pipes, searching mapping. There were only so many doors here. Unless Helen didn't mean this house at all. Madeira came to mind, though I'd never been. She'd spoken of it once, years ago, in a way that made me think it was just another daydream on her long list of places for another life. I'd brushed it off at the time, too busy with work deadlines and local obligations. Now the thought stayed in the room like an uninvited but necessary guest. I put the key back in the box and closed it, sliding it toward the back of the desk. Some things are meant to be kept close until you're ready to be changed by them. Around 10, the phone rang. I checked the caller ID. Thomas Grady, my old lawyer. His voice was the same, steady, with that slightly amused undercurrent of someone who's seen people ruin themselves in 100 creative ways. "Earl," he said, "I hear from a little bird that your son's been trying to float your lake house on the market." "More than float," I said. "He's trying to sail it right out from under me." Thomas chuckled. "They forget you have my number." "They forget a lot of things," I said. "Good. That means we can use their assumptions to our advantage. I'll draft a notice. Something firm enough to scare off any casual buyers Jason might lure in." "Appreciate it," I said. "I'm not ready for a fight, but I'm not surrendering the fort either." "You never were," Thomas said. "I'll email you the draft today." When I hung up, I felt a small surge of control return to the room. Not victory, just the sense that the ground under my feet was mine again. I spent the next hour doing what Helen used to call reclaiming the perimeter. It's a habit from my engineering days, walking the edges of a site to understand the terrain before deciding what to build. I started in the living room, checking the windows, straightening a stack of National Geographics Helen kept for the maps inside. In the hallway, I passed the wedding photo we'd never bothered to frame properly, still clipped into the cardboard folder from the photographer. Helen had liked it that way, as if it wasn't finished yet. By the time I reached the back bedroom, I realized I was tracing her presence more than inspecting the house. Every drawer, every shelf had her handwriting on it somewhere, labels, notes, little reminders in the margins of old receipts. That's when I saw it in the corner of the closet under an old wool blanket, a navy blue shoebox. I pulled it out and sat on the edge of the bed. Inside were postcards, dozens of them, all from Madeira. Some were addressed to her, some blank. The ones addressed to her were from Maria Duarte. The handwriting was loose, confident. Most had no date, just short lines like, "The sea is calm today, wish you were here," or "Found a place you'd love, all wood and light." At the bottom of the stack was one addressed to both of us, never sent. It read, for the day you're ready to see what we've been building for you. I leaned back, shoebox in my lap. This was no casual vacation, friend. Maria was a thread in a tapestry Helen had been weaving without telling me. Not out of malice, out of design. I put the shoebox on the bed and went to the office for the envelope. The two items, the envelope and the shoebox, felt like pieces of the same puzzle, but I wasn't ready to fit them together yet, not until I understood the edges. Around noon, I made a sandwich and ate it standing up in the kitchen. That's when the phone buzzed. A text from Megan: "Basement's ready anytime you are. Just thinking about you." I stared at the message for a while before typing back, "Thanks. I'm good here for now." No response. The silence was its kind of pressure. In the afternoon, I called Lily. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright but edged with fatigue. "Hey, Grandpa. You sound like you're thinking about something dangerous." "Dangerous for who?" I asked. "Depends," she said. "Is this about Mom and Uncle Jason?" In a way, I said, "but also about your grandmother, and a place called Madeira." She laughed softly. "Isn't that in Portugal? Sounds warm." "It is," I said, "and it's where your grandmother left a piece of our story. I didn't give her more than that, just enough to plant the seed. If there's one thing Helen taught me, it's that timing is everything when you want someone to remember." By late afternoon, the sky had gone the kind of gray that erases the horizon. The lake and the air became one surface, cold and endless. I sat by the window, the navy envelope in my hand, the shoebox on the table beside me. I thought about Helen walking into a post office somewhere in Madeira, buying postcards she knew I wouldn't see for years. About her tucking away a brass key and trusting I'd find it only when I could handle what it unlocked. That night, as I turned out the lights, I paused at the office door. The envelope and shoebox were still there waiting. I realized then that whatever game my children thought they were playing with the lake house, they were amateurs compared to Helen. And I was finally ready to learn the rest of the rules. The envelope had been sitting on Helen's desk for nearly a week now, patient in a way only inanimate objects can be. I'd passed it dozens of times, letting my fingertips brush against its smooth navy surface each time, telling myself, not yet. But that morning I woke with a different weight in my chest. Not grief exactly. Grief had its texture heavier and less negotiable. This was something sharper. Purpose. I made coffee black and carried it into the office. The light was thin through the frosted glass of the window, pooling on the desk like it had been waiting for this moment. I reached for the envelope and slid my thumb under the flap. Inside were 3 items: a folded letter in Helen's handwriting, a slim packet of legal documents, and a small slip of paper with a string of numbers that looked like an account code. I went for the letter first. "Earl, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to say things out loud anymore. You've always been steady, even when the ground under you wasn't. I've kept something aside somewhere they can't touch, not because I thought you'd ever lose this house, but because I knew the day might come when the people you love forget what you've given them. The house in Madeira is in your name alone. Maria knows every detail. Keep it quiet until you've decided how you want to use it. As for the bonds, those are in a separate account. The numbers on the slip will get you in. You'll know what to do with them when the time comes. When they start talking to you like you're a problem to solve, remember this: you are not a problem. You are the foundation they've been standing on all their lives. And foundations don't beg to be kept. They decide what gets to stay. H. I read it twice, my eyes stopping at that last line. Foundations don't beg. That was Helen through and through, firm, not cruel. Deliberate, not theatrical. The legal packet was straightforward: a deed for the Madeira property notarized 12 years ago, a portfolio summary of municipal bonds worth more than I'd have guessed, and a letter from a Portuguese notary verifying sole ownership in my name. No mention of these in any of the joint documents Jason or Megan might one day rifle through. Helen had hidden this corner of our life in plain sight simply by never naming it in the rooms they stood in. I closed the envelope and slid it back into the desk drawer, locking it. That was when I picked up the phone and called Thomas Grady. He answered on the first ring. "I was just thinking about you," he said. "Hope it was the kind of thinking that makes lawyers smile," I replied. "It was the kind that makes them draft letters before breakfast. I've got something for Jason's buyer if he's real, and for any agent sniffing around." I told him about the envelope, not the bonds or the Madeira house, but the principle behind them, the fact that Helen had seen this coming. I don't want them thinking they can move on this property without me noticing, I said. I want them to know I'm paying attention. Thomas was quiet for a beat. We can send a cease and desist to any party that's been approached. It won't just slow them down, it'll plant doubt. Nobody likes a deal with clouds over it. Make it official, I said. And Thomas, yes. Copy Jason and Megan. He gave a low whistle. That'll get you some phone calls. I'm counting on it. The letter went out that afternoon. By the next morning, Jason's name was flashing on my phone. I let it ring twice before picking up. Dad, what the hell are you doing? His voice was tight, more insulted than worried. Preserving my property, I said evenly. You're making this difficult for no reason. I've got a serious buyer. Cash offer. Your buyer's problem, I said, is that the seller isn't selling. Silence. Then, you can't live out there forever, Dad. The winters I've made it through 67 of them. This one won't kill me. You're being stubborn. That's one way to see it. What's the other way? That I'm the owner. And that ends the conversation. I heard his exhale sharp through the receiver. Fine. But don't expect me to come running when you need help. I'll be sure not to. We hung up. 10 minutes later, Megan called. Her tone was lighter, but I could hear the same frustration beneath it. Dad, I heard Jason's upset. What's going on? You tell me, I said. I just think it's time you had less to manage. That house is a lot of work. It's work I choose. I'm only saying I know what you're saying, Megan. I'm just telling you I'm not interested. She sighed. You've always been like this, holding on to things. Some things are worth holding on to. There was a pause. Then she shifted tactics. Well, my offer still stands. The basement's yours whenever you're ready. I'll keep that in mind, I said, and hung up. After those calls, the house felt different. Not heavier, sharper, like the edges had been sanded down for years and were now showing again. I spent the afternoon writing a letter of my own, one that wasn't meant for Jason or Megan. It was for Lily. I told her the lake house was staying in the family, but not in the way her mother or uncle imagined. I didn't mention Madeira yet, just that her grandmother had left something special, and that one day she and I would take a trip together to see it. I mailed it the same day, a seed planted in a quieter garden. That night I sat by the fire with Helen's letter again. The firelight caught the loops of her handwriting the way she always slanted her ease. I could hear her voice in the pauses, the emphasis on certain words. She'd written it for a moment when I might feel cornered, and reading it now I realized she'd given me more than instructions. She'd permitted me. Permission to play the long game. 2 days later, Thomas called again. You'll be happy to know the serious buyer has withdrawn. Didn't like the uncertainty. I smiled into the phone. One down, and Jason Thomas asked, He'll stew. That's fine. Stewing people reveal themselves. You've got something planned, he said. I've got time, I replied. I started to make small changes after that. Little reinforcements. Called the county clerk to ensure all property tax records were up to date. Reviewed the insurance policy. Checked the locks, replaced the 2 oldest ones. Not because I expected an actual break-in. Jason and Megan wouldn't stoop that far. But I'd learned over the years that the best defense is to leave no cracks for water to seep in. Not physical water, not metaphorical. One evening I pulled out the brass key from the tea box in Helen's desk, held it in my palm, felt its weight. It was the size of possibility, small enough to lose, big enough to change everything. I thought about calling Maria right then, but decided against it. Not yet. Let the currents in Boston and New York swirl a little longer. Let Jason and Megan think they'd hit a wall they couldn't climb. Because what they didn't know was that the wall was just the first part of the structure. Behind it, there was an entire landscape they couldn't even see. By the end of the week, I had the legal side buttoned down tight. The lake house wasn't going anywhere without my signature, and my signature wasn't going anywhere without my say-so. But I knew this was just the opening move. Jason's ambition wasn't the kind that gave up after one blocked shot. And Megan's persistence, quieter but just as firm, would find other ways to try to convince me. That was fine. Let them come. I'd built bridges in storms before. I knew how to hold a line until the other side ran out of rope. I stood at the window that night looking out at the ice stretching across the lake. Somewhere under that frozen surface, water was still moving. Quiet. Patient. Waiting for the right season to break through. So was I. The sky the next morning was the color of a bruise that had decided not to tell anyone how it got there. March does that here light that looks like it's recovering from something. I stood in the doorway of the hall closet with a pad of sticky notes and a black marker and told myself this wasn't pettiness. Pettiness is loud. This would be quiet, clear. The closet still called itself a linen closet, though it had been a museum for 20 years, shelves stacked with the soft evidence of a family that used to occupy every room at once. Helen's quilts, the good guest sheets with the tiny blue flowers she pretended to hate. A box labeled camping that hadn't left the house since Lily was 8 and convinced she could befriend a raccoon. On the top shelf, tucked behind a stack of beach towels, was a shoebox with masking tape across it in my block handwriting from another decade. Jason, school. I set it on the hall runner and kept going. Megan's things had a way of pretending they were part of the architecture, a hat box her freshman roommate called aspirational, a portfolio case with a broken zipper, a small wooden crate stenciled with Megan's room in a child's hand, I recognized as my own from a summer when neat labels felt like love. Above the crate, a flat box held the yellowed sheet music for Für Elise. I could hear the first 8 bars in the bones of the house. I brought everything to the dining table and built 2 islands, Jason to the left, Megan to the right. The table is heavy oak. We bought it the year Jason refused to eat anything that wasn't the color of football leather. I ran my hand along the edge and found the little notch where a moving man had knocked it against the doorframe in '98 and apologized as if he'd insulted a person. Helen had said, "Don't worry, that's how it learns our story." I opened Jason's box first. The smell reached up paper dust, a whiff of whatever they put in trophy cases to make your past feel like a museum. On top, a stack of baseball cards he'd once sworn would fund his future. Barry Bonds, Ken Griffey Jr., a rookie card in a plastic sleeve he'd guarded like a relic. Beneath that, a leather belt from his first suit, the one we bought off the rack when he thought a jacket could take the place of patience. A photo of him at 14 with a bat too heavy for his wrists and that half-feral grin boys wear when they think they've already become men by wanting to. I set the cards to one side, the belt to the other, and kept digging. His high school diploma. The tassel in a sandwich bag pressed flat. I remembered the day June Heaton speeches about horizons. Jason's name was mispronounced by a vice principal who never learned anyone's names correctly unless their parents were on the booster board. I took a sticky note and wrote in my neat print, "Yours. Keep it." I stuck it to the diploma's corner. Next, a little tin. I opened it and laughed baby teeth. We'd told him the tooth fairy kept books with ledgers, and we had to deposit the teeth to get the dollar. He'd believed us until he was 11 and too proud to ask questions. I held one up and felt ridiculous and holy. How does a man hold a piece of what used to attach him to a boy? I set the tin back closed. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue, was the leather jacket I'd given him when he turned 19. He'd looked in the mirror and tilted his chin like a man auditioning for the part of someone who doesn't need advice. The jacket smelled faintly of cologne and old nights. I slipped my hand into the pocket and found a folded bar napkin with a phone number and a name I didn't recognize. Time has a sense of humor. Megan's stack opened quieter. Her sketchbook's elastic band tired out a graphite smudge on her thumbprint worn into the cover. I paged through. The house from 3 angles, Helen in profile, sitting on the back steps reading. Jason's truck, the week he loved it. The lake in November as a blunt line. Her piano books had pencil notes, slow here. Don't rush a small heart next to a measure she told me once felt like remembering someone. I lifted the scarf Helen knit for her in a shade of blue they'd argued about for a whole Saturday. "This isn't my color," Megan said. "It will be," Helen answered, and later when the winter light hit her daughter's face just right, it was. I wrote a note for Megan, too, on the top page of her oldest sketchbook, "What you finish is yours. What you leave here isn't." I didn't mean it as a scolding. I meant it as a boundary, which is a kinder kind of sentence than no if you say it with love. When the piles were made, I went to the garage to find clean boxes. The garage is a machine of its own. Every tool on its peg, the push broom hung high, a coil of orange extension cord, looped with the attention you give a snake you trust. I brought 3 medium boxes into the house and lined them with old newspapers I saved because I never learned how to throw out a headline. I packed Jason's things carefully, the cards face up as if they needed air, the diploma on top, the jacket folded like a story that isn't over yet. For Megan's sketchbooks, the hat box with nothing useful in it except the memory of her turning modeling asking if the angle looked right. The piano books stacked in order of ambition, smallest on top. I labeled each box with a Sharpie in block letters. Jason, personal, return, and Megan, personal, return. I wrote fragile in the corner because memory cracks if you toss it too hard. When you're a man my age, people will tell you you're making a point for drama. What I was making was a delivery. Points argue. Deliveries clarify. I called a local courier service, not a big company with a tracking app that sends confetti when your box moves 2 counties over. A 3-truck outfit run by a man named Rodriguez who's built like the good end of a day's work. He answered on the second ring. Rodriguez. This is Earl Whitaker out on Miller Point. I know the house, he said. You need a pickup. 2 boxes for my son in Boston. 1 for my daughter in Manhattan. Deliver to the door. Photographs as proof. Ask for a signature. If they won't sign, photograph the box at the threshold. He whistled softly. Complicated family. Just precise instructions, I said. We can do tomorrow morning, 7 to 9. 7, I said. Let the timing do some of the talking. He laughed once. I like it when the boxes get to deliver a message. Me too, I said. After I hung up, I wrote 2 letters on plain white paper, not emails. Ink has a temperature that pixels can't hold. Jason, I'm returning what belongs to you. I'm keeping what belongs to me. If you have any questions about the difference, you'll need to learn to ask the right ones, Dad. Megan, what you finish stays with you. I'm done storing your beginnings. If you want this house to hold you again, come as a guest. Dad. I slid Jason's into the collar of the leather jacket so his fingers would find it where his vanity used to live. I placed Megan's beneath the top flap of her oldest sketchbook, where the page still held the pressure of a pencil that had believed in lines before words. Evening moved through the house. The light became a low gold that made everything look like it wanted to tell me a secret. I set the boxes by the door and put a post-it on the knob. Lock back door, hot water on, keys for Rodriguez. Helen used to tease me about notes. You're making a museum tour out of a day. Maybe. But museums preserve things people might mishandle. I slept poorly, not from doubt, but from anticipation. The kind that lives in your legs like they want the morning to hurry up and arrive. At 6:51, I turned on the porch light. At 6:59, I heard the rumble of a truck that meant its steering was honest. Rodriguez stepped out cap low against the wind, 2 younger men behind him with dollies that had seen worse winters than this one. Mr. Whitaker, he said, offering his hand. We're your couriers. Appreciate you, I said. Boston first, Manhattan second. He glanced at the boxes. Names are clear. You want them to sign signature if they will. Photos either way. He nodded. You want them to know the sender? Yes. In my handwriting, I said, let that do a little of the work for me. They moved with the economy of people who know how to carry other people's lives without taking any of it. At the door, I handed Rodriguez 2 envelopes with addresses and my number. If they ask questions, I said, don't answer. Your delivery, not debate. He smiled. That's my favorite part. At 7:23, the truck door thudded shut. Rodriguez tipped his cap. We'll be gentle. He paused, then added, and respectful. Respect buys more than people think, I said. When the truck turned out toward town, the house inhaled. It's remarkable how quiet can change shape. Last night's quiet was a holding pattern. This morning was a clean sheet. I made coffee and did not forget to drink it. While the mug was still warm, I wrote a new line on my rules page 8. Return what's theirs before they ask for what's yours. At 9:07, my phone buzzed. A photo from an unknown number timestamped 7:58 a.m. Boston. Jason's front steps, brick immaculate, a welcome mat that said, hello like a command. The box on the top step, my handwriting visible. Jason, personal, return. In the corner of the frame, the sleeve of a man's coat, a hand reaching down to lift. No caption. The second image arrived 31 minutes later, 8:29 a.m. Manhattan. A narrow hallway with black and white tile, Megan's door propped with a shoe. The box leaned against it. You could see the corner of her umbrella stand. The photo was angled so the word return read like a headline. I sent back a single word to the courier received. At 10:13, Jason called. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. What is this? His voice was controlled but panting like he'd run to catch up with something already gone. A delivery, I said. You sent me what? My childhood, my junk. To my house. Your belongings, I said. This is petty, he said. This is accurate, I said. You think you're making a point. I told you I said deliveries clarify. You had no right to go through my things. I had every right to stop storing them, I said. This house is not a warehouse for the versions of you that couldn't carry themselves. He blew air into the phone. So what's next, Dad? You going to mail me the porch swing? The air. You think this changes anything? I think I said. You're going to realize that when a man stops holding your past, you can't use it to pry open his present. Silence. He hates silence when it belongs to someone else. Don't send me anything else, he said finally. Then don't leave anything else behind, I said, and hung up. At 11:02, Megan texted, You okay? A box showed up. I wish you had told me. I didn't respond immediately. I opened the back door and stood on the step with the cold biting my jaw in a way I appreciate. The lake's surface had learned a new trick overnight. The top inch had gone glassy, reflecting a pale sun that had the decency to be present but not perform. The maple by the path clicked in the light wind like someone counting coins in another room. The phone buzzed again. Dad, I typed. I'm okay. Returning what's yours. She called. I picked up. Is this a message? She asked. Everything we send is a message, I said, even when we call it mail. She made a small noise that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been a defense. You could have just asked me to pick this up. I did, I said. Multiple times. For years. Asking turned into storing. Storing turned into assuming. I'm stopping the math where it should have ended. I heard her breath measured like she was telling it to behave. There's a letter inside, she said quietly. There is, I said. What you finish is yours, she read. The words sounded different in her mouth. You think I don't finish things? I think you start so many things brilliantly that finishing feels like betrayal. She was silent for a long moment. That's almost kind, she said. And it still hurts. Maybe it should, I said gently. Pain is a teacher Helen trusted. She never liked him, but she trusted him. I found the scarf, she said, changing subjects and not. It's bluer than I remember. She said it would be. I said, Dad. She breathed soft as a match being struck. Are you leaving? Not the house, I said. Not today. That's not what I asked. I know I said. And for the first time in this whole long winter, I allowed myself the mercy of not explaining everything I understood. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and laid my palms flat on the wood that had held 1,000 meals and 3 big decisions. I thought of Helen's letter. Foundations don't beg to be kept. This table was a foundation. The house, the marriage, the role I had agreed to play in our family without auditioning for its supporting beam occasional storm wall quiet room at the end of the hall where Sense lived. At noon, Joyce knocked with the back of the hand tap she uses when she's not sure if she's interrupting. I opened the door. She held a pie tin under a towel. Don't ask me what kind, she said. I get offended when people try to guess. Then I'll be grateful first and accurate later, I said, and she smiled. She looked past me at the clear spot by the door where the boxes had been. Joyce is the type who sees everything and only says the part you're ready to hear. You cleared some space, she said. I did. Feels good. Feels like folding a map along the right crease, I said. Good, she said. Maps packed wrong get torn. She set the pie down, touched my forearm. You call if the map tries to fold you. After lunch pecan, which I did guess and was allowed to, I walked through the rooms with new eyes. It's amazing what absence does for the view. Without the boxes, the hallway looked taller. Without the crate marked Megan's room, the guest room felt less like a stale museum and more like a bed that deserved to be slept in. I opened the windows for 10 minutes and let the air behave like it was designed to. The house was approved. Around 3, I went down to the basement. The The sump pump chuffed once satisfied. On the shelf near the fuse box, I found the old Polaroid camera. I blew dust off it and smiled at my silly self. No film. Next to it, a cigar box with Lily written in a 13-year-old's mournful loops. Inside a collection that told on her a feather, a foreign coin, a ticket stub from a local theater where she'd leaned her head on Helen's shoulder and whispered, "Do all stories end where they should?" I'd whispered back, "Only the ones that know their stories." Underneath a scribbled list titled, "Plans Learn to Build Arches. Make a lemon pie like Grandma. See a place where the water smells different." I put the list in my wallet. It felt like permission. At 4:37, a text from Rodriguez. A photo of Jason's signature on a delivery slip, his name big, impatient. Then another Megan in a neat script received by M. Carter. Under the second photo, Rodriguez had typed, "Done." Felt like the right kind of work. It was, I wrote back. At dusk, the phone rang. Jason again. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought, let him show me who he wants to be today. "You're serious about this," he said without preamble. "I am," I said. "You think boxes change the fact that you can't maintain that place forever?" "Nothing changes the fact that time keeps its calendar," I said. "But I choose what fills the days." "You're going to end up alone," he said as if he were promising me weather. "I've been alone," I said. "The kind that has a person still in the room and gone anyway. This kind is cleaner." He didn't like that. "So what the next step is, you disown us. Put the house in some trust nobody can touch, run off to Florida." "Florida doesn't have the right water," I said, and he barked a small laugh despite himself. "Look," he said, weary now, the sound of a man out of rehearsed lines. I don't want to find out something happened to you because you were too proud to admit you needed help." "I'm not too proud," I said. "I'm too old to confuse control with care." "That sounds like something Mom would say," he muttered. "It does," I said. "You should listen to it." We didn't say goodbye so much as we put the phone down at the same time. I didn't take the call as a surrender. I took it as a man noticing he'd pushed against something that wouldn't move and discovering that didn't ruin his day. Night settled without ceremony. I washed dishes with the radio off. In the quiet, the thought came simple as a street sign. I had been storing more than boxes. I had been storing outcomes for my children, absorbing their unfinishedness, holding their might-be's so they could travel light. Helen had let me do it because she understood love as a series of small leverages you apply where it matters most. But love has to mature when you can't carry it the old way. I went to Helen's office and found the brass key again. I laid it on the blotter next to the navy envelope and the shoebox of postcards. 3 objects, 1 story. I traced the edge of the key. I pictured a door somewhere that fit it, a lock that would recognize it, a house with white walls and light the color of lemons rolled under a palm, a woman named Maria who knew how to tell the truth softly. On my rules page, I added a 9th line 9, "Return the weight you're not meant to carry, or it will decide for you what to drop." The next morning I woke with a steadiness that didn't need to prove itself. I shaved with the sandalwood soap Helen used to love, and for the first time since she died, the mirror didn't feel like an accusation. I made coffee, drank it while it was still hot, and walked to the window. The lake had a new seam down the middle where the ice was thinking about giving up its stubbornness. A crow on the birch announced nothing in particular and was satisfied. On the table my phone buzzed. A photo from Megan. The scarf around her neck blue and ridiculous and perfect. Her face was half in frame, eyes red in a way she hadn't edited. The caption, "Practicing." Then another message from a number with a country code I did not recognize. "This is Maria. When you are ready to stop storing everyone else's winters, come see our spring." I smiled like a man who had been forgiven by a geography. I wrote back, "Soon, but not before Sunday. Not before a pie with Lily that tastes like a decision. Not before one more walk of the perimeter with a pencil in my pocket to write down the things that needed to be done and the ones that didn't deserve to be called work anymore." At noon, I called Rodriguez to thank him again. He said the kind of thing only men who move boxes for a living understand. When you send something to the right address, the house it leaves finally gets quiet. "Mine did," I said. "Good," he said. "Then that was the point." After we hung up, I took out 2 sheets of paper and wrote the addresses I'd been avoiding writing down Jason's and Megan's in my hand on a lined sheet I folded and slipped into the drawer labeled important, with no other explanation. If someday someone needed to know where I decided to stop storing them, I wanted it on paper in black ink written by the man who finally learned to label the map correctly. Late afternoon, the sun found a way through the clouds like a tired parent making it to the school play for the last act. The kitchen was filled with a stubborn gold. I set the kettle on, not for tea, just for the sound. I like water that remembers it has another form. I went to the office, sat, and pulled the navy envelope, the shoebox, and the brass key into a neat row. Returning what's theirs, I said aloud, means going where mine is. I opened the shoebox and took the postcard at the bottom again, the one addressed to both of us, never sent. For the day you're ready to see what we've been building for you. I turned it over. In tiny letters on the corner, a number, plus 351. A phone. How many years had this been waiting? How many chances had I missed because I thought storage and stewardship were the same job I dialed? The ring sounded different longer, as if it had to cross a room full of light to reach a person. A woman answered in a voice that carried the smile before the words. "Senor Whitaker." "This is Earl," I said. "Ah," she said, and the syllable rolled like a small wave over stones. "Then the map is right." We didn't speak for long. She did not oversell the sun. She did not promise answers. She said simply, "The house is ready to be useful. The door is where it was. The key in your hand will be welcomed by the lock. Come when you want the air to stop apologizing for being cold." After I ended the call, I put the key back down and realized my hands were steady. The kind of steady you get when you've returned what isn't yours and picked up what is. The kind of steady you build a bridge with. That evening, I lit the fire, sat in the chair that had learned me, and watched the flames do their straightforward work. In the quiet, I could almost hear Helen's voice, not as memory, but as instruction. "There. Now you've made room for your life again." It was a Tuesday when they came. The kind of late winter Tuesday where the air outside is brittle enough to crack, but the lake still holds its ice like a stubborn secret. I'd been up since before dawn, listening to the slow creak of the house settling into its bones, running my hands along the window frames Helen used to insist we oil every spring. The fire was still a low orange knot in the hearth when the crunch of tires on the gravel drive broke the quiet. Jason's truck, Boston plates dusted with salt from the turnpike, pulled in first. Megan's black SUV followed, idling behind him like a shadow that didn't want to commit. I stayed in my chair by the window and watched them in the glass reflection. Jason climbed out without a coat, as if the cold might take orders from his impatience. Megan's heels clicked against the ice patches on the walk. She was wearing the same camel wool coat Helen once said made her look like someone who knew where the bodies were buried. They didn't knock right away. I could hear a muffled conversation, the rise and fall of voices trying to agree on who should speak first. Eventually, Jason's fist landed against the door 3 hard raps. Not the knock of a visitor, the knock of someone convinced he already owns the place. I took my time, unlatched the lock, opened the door, let the wind cut between us before I said anything. "Dad." Jason began, his tone somewhere between brisk and rehearsed. "We've come to—" "Talk," Megan interrupted. She was holding a folder under her arm the way people hold documents when they think paper can make them sound reasonable. I stepped aside and let them in. Not because they'd earned it, but because confrontations are best staged on home turf. The air between them and the fireplace seemed to shrink as they crossed the threshold. Jason got straight to it. "We've brought a letter of intent from a serious buyer. This isn't just some casual offer, it's solid. Cash, above market." Megan slid the folder open and placed a few sheets on the coffee table between us. "It's from an investor out of New York. Wants the place as a vacation rental. Says he can close in 30 days. I didn't look at the papers. I looked at them. My son with the real estate salesman's posture, shoulders forward, chin tilted like he's selling me my floorboards. My daughter with her PR voice smoothed to a polite edge, eyes darting to measure my reaction. Jason tapped the top sheet. "Dad, you have to understand this is the best time to sell. You're sitting on equity that could make things easier for you." Maintenance on a place like this, it's too much for one person. And moving into Megan's basement apartment, she added, would mean you're close to family. We could help. Keep an eye on you. I leaned back in my chair, letting the fire's warmth claim my side. Maintenance is under control. Taxes are paid. No mortgage to worry about. I don't need easier. I need mine. Jason's jaw twitched. You're being stubborn. Stubborn, I repeated, tasting the word. That's one way to say it. Another way is clear. Megan tried again, her voice softening. Dad, it's not just about you. The value of this house, it's part of the family's future. You could pass down more in cash than you can in an old property by a frozen lake. I let the silence stretch. The kind of silence Helen once said makes people fill it with things they didn't plan to admit. And right on cue, Jason sighed. Look, he said, we've already spoken to a lawyer. There are ways, guardianship, joint ownership, that could make the sale happen, even if you're hesitant. There it was, the edge beneath the politeness, the part they'd kept sheathed until now. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. You want to know the truth? I paid off this house 10 years ago. Every board, every nail, every shingle bought and kept without owing a cent to anyone, and I'm not behind on a single bill. So whatever your lawyer told you about prying this place out of my hands, you can forget it. Megan's eyes flicked to Jason. He shrugged, the unspoken told you so passing between them like a private code. Jason's voice sharpened. Dad, you're making this harder than it has to be. That's because you're trying to measure my life in square footage and market trends, I said. And I measure it in winters survived and summers on the porch. In the sound this dock makes when the ice breaks in April, you don't get to take that from me. The air in the room tightened. Outside, the wind slapped the lake's surface, sending a shiver through the ice. I stood not to intimidate, but to signal the conversation's end. This house isn't for sale, not to your investor, not to anyone you charm into drawing up paperwork. And if the next time you drive out here it's only to talk about selling, don't bother getting out of the car. Jason opened his mouth, but I lifted a hand. We're done for today. Megan gathered the papers slowly, as if hoping the weight of the gesture might change my mind. It didn't. Jason shoved his hands in his pockets, his jaw working like he was chewing on the last argument and couldn't swallow it. At the door, Megan paused. You know, Dad, there's a difference between protecting what's yours and shutting people out. I looked past her out at the frozen lake. There's also a difference between family visiting and family looting. Jason muttered something under his breath that I didn't bother asking him to repeat. They walked down the steps, their footsteps crunching against the gravel. The two vehicles reversed down the drive taillights, blinking like retreating signals in the cold. I closed the door and leaned against it for a long moment, listening to the sudden absence of their voices. The house seemed to breathe again, the fire snapping as if to say good riddance. On the kitchen counter sat Helen's navy envelope, still unopened since the night I found it. I traced the edge of it with my finger, thinking about how easily they assumed they could strip this place down to a number on a page. How little they understood about what it means to keep something alive, not just in walls and beams, but in the weight it carries for the person who's lived it. I poured myself coffee and stood by the window watching the lake hold its frozen silence. Somewhere under that ice was the same water Helen and I had swum in every summer for 3 decades. It wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the right season to show itself again. That's the thing about holding your ground. It isn't about digging in your heels until you're exhausted. It's about knowing which ground is worth holding and being willing to let the rest go. And this ground, the house, the lake, the quiet, wasn't going anywhere. Not while I was still here to keep the door closed. The town office still smells like varnish and old winter. The kind of place where decisions that dent lives are made in rooms with acoustic tile ceilings and a flag wedged into a corner as if patriotism were a furniture problem. I arrived 10 minutes early because showing up on time feels like asking to be rearranged by other people's calendars. I like rooms to know I was there before the first knock. Thomas Grady was already seated at the far end of the long table, pen lined up 1 inch from his yellow legal pad, the way men who read fine print line up their days. He gave me a nod that said we were not here to perform. He slid a fresh copy of his letter across to my side. Notice of non-representation. No agent authorized to list or sell my property. Cease directed to any broker, buyer, or attorney attempting to interfere with quiet enjoyment. And a statement of competency which I had asked him to draft in advance. It wasn't required. It was punctuation. "You look ready," he said. "I'm tired of being spoken about in rooms I'm not in," I said. "Today I intend to be in the room." He smiled with his eyes, which is the only place worth smiling. The door opened at 9:01. Megan walked in first, file folder tucked like a shield. Jason followed, tie too tight, the knot of a man who strangles his sentences before they have a chance to breathe. Behind them, a younger attorney with a haircut that believed in itself. He introduced himself to the table, smooth and practiced. "Jeff Caldwell," he said to Thomas, then to me, "Mr. Whitaker." "Thomas Grady." Thomas replied, shaking hands lightly like he preferred ink on paper to oil on skin. We did not do small talk. Small talk is a kind of cowardice in rooms where people intend to change your address. A clerk poked her head in to say we could use the conference room down the hall. I picked up the stack of notices and let everyone else carry their belief in leverage. The conference room had the same long table, the same chairs, with the same habit of squeaking only when the wrong person sat. We took our places, Jason and Megan side by side like a brand campaign, Jeff at their corner. Thomas to my left, one foot grounded, the other ready. Jeff opened with the competence of a man who had learned to bake empathy into his tone without letting it color his billable hours. "We're here in good faith," he said, the phrase living in a nest of disclaimers, to discuss a path forward that protects Mr. Whitaker's well-being while acknowledging the realities of maintaining a property of this size. Thomas slid the notice of non-representation into the center of the table with a finger. "We're here in clarity," he said. "My client owns his home outright. He is not listing it. He has not authorized any person to solicit buyers. Any further attempt to do so will be treated as tortious interference." Jeff inclined his head as if a bow were required by etiquette. "We acknowledge the notice," he said, "but we should also acknowledge the broader context." "Mr. Whitaker is 67, I said, "not a category." Jason's jaw clicked. Megan's mouth softened and then found a line. She looked at me the way people look at a door they keep assuming will open if they just keep talking to it. Jeff continued. "There have been concerns expressed privately that Mr. Whitaker's ability to maintain the premises and make complex decisions may be compromised by grief." Thomas didn't look up from his pad. Privately, he repeated, "is doing heavy lifting" in that sentence. Jeff spread his hands as if showing he wasn't hiding any knives. "We're simply exploring options guardianship or perhaps a co-ownership arrangement that would ensure the property doesn't become a burden." Thomas slid the second document out like a dealer laying down a card you should have seen coming. "Statement of competency signed by my primary physician, testimony to my clean scans. Memory recall, executive function, and independent daily living. Dates, numbers, unromantic proof. You'll find that burdens," Thomas said, "remain subjective until you meet objective standards. We meet them." Silence works harder in fluorescent light. You could hear the hum above us and the scrape of a chair in a room down the hall. Jeff read the statement as if the ink might confess. Jason's eyes bounced off the paper like it had burned him. Megan looked at me, then away, then back, like she wanted to find a different movie playing on the wall behind my head. I reached for the third document and slid it toward Jeff. Cease and desist, names redacted in the copy originals with the county and with Thomas. "Your serious buyer," I said to Jason, "will receive his copy this afternoon." Jeff glanced at Jason and then recovered his poise. "We're not trying to fight Mr. Whitaker," he said. "We're trying to plan." "I planned," I said, "for 43 years. That's what paying off a mortgage is. That's what repairing a dock is. That's what pruning a rosemary hedge is. It's planning to still be where you say you belong." Megan leaned forward. "Dad, we're not your enemies. Then stop showing up with paperwork that treats me like a problem," I said, "and let the sentence land with its weight." Thomas folded his hands. "There is a second matter," he said neutrally, looking down at his notes like we were simply reading the agenda. "Threats, however vague, about petitioning for guardianship. Those calls were recorded with notice under Vermont law. If such a petition is filed, we'll submit the recordings to establish not only competency, but also attempted financial coercion. I'm sure your client understands how poorly those tapes play in front of a judge." Jeff's mouth did a thing competent mouths do when they would rather not be attached to the person whose case they are arguing. "We're not here to threaten litigation," he said. "We're here to avoid it." "Then avoid it," Thomas said pleasantly. Jason planted his hands on the table. "He can't keep living out there alone," he said, voice thinning at the edges. "He's going to fall on the steps or forget the stove or..." I changed the back door latch last week, I said. Repaired the loose spindle on the banister. Had the chimney swept. Installed new batteries in the smoke detectors. You want the brand? I wrote it down. He looked at me like I had betrayed a script he was counting on. You're making this adversarial, he said. It's adversarial, I said, when two people want different things and only one of them wants to use a judge to get it. He sat back slowly, defense draining into posture. Megan's voice came softer. Dad, she said, and this time she let the word be the real word, not a label. What are you so afraid will happen if you just let us help? I thought of the brass key on Helen's desk, the postcards of Madeira, the envelope with her square hand telling me I was a foundation and not a petition. I thought of the dock in April when the ice breaks and if you listen you can hear the lake groan as it returns to itself. Help, I said, is masonry when a wall is failing. Help is soup when the fever won't break. Help is showing up on a Sunday with pie and sitting without an agenda. Help is not a letter of intent slid across my table like a verdict. Megan swallowed. She looked down at her hands, then at the folder, then at Jeff. Then she did something I had not expected. She closed the folder. It was a small sound. It echoed. Jeff cleared his throat, sensing his angle shift under him. Perhaps we can consider a compromise, he said, pivoting like a man stepping to the other foot on a swaying deck. A timeline. If Mr. Whitaker chooses to sell within, say, 12 months, he agrees to consult his children. If not, we revisit. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Consult is a wide word, he said. You can drive a moving truck through it. We're just trying to keep communication open, Jeff said. Communication has been open, I said. You called to sell my house the week we buried my wife. That wasn't fair strictly, but it was true enough to do the work of a boundary. The clerk opened the door a crack and said we had 5 minutes left in the room. Time had done its democratic thing again, allotting us a portion and caring nothing for what fit into it. Thomas gathered his papers in a neat stack. Our position is straightforward, he said. The property is not for sale. Any attempt to list or solicit buyers will be met with action. If you file guardianship papers, we'll respond with evidence that will make you regret printing them. He looked at Jeff the way good lawyers look at other good lawyers when they would rather not go to war. Don't let your client make you do stupid work. Jeff nodded once, a concession disguised as manners. He closed his folder without the same finality Megan had mustered. We'll advise accordingly, he said. Jason stood too fast, his chair complaining. He looked at me like a man who had lost an argument and therefore needed to win a feeling. This isn't over, he said, which is what men say when the law has just told them it is. It is for today, I said. We filed out into the hallway where framed photographs of ribbon cuttings pretended to be history. At the door, Megan put her hand briefly on my sleeve. Pie on Sunday, she asked. It was not an apology. It was an invitation to stop counting. Yes, I said. 2 o'clock. If the conversation turns into square footage, you'll eat it on the porch. She smiled despite herself. Fair. Jason stared past us at the parking lot. His mouth had found a straight line he used to practice in the mirror when he thought seriousness could be worn like cologne. I'll call you, he said, which I took as a promise he might keep to himself. Outside, the wind bit clean. We all did that little dance people do when the cold reminds them of their shoulders. Thomas squinted up at the winter sun like a man checking a plumb line. You handled that, he said. I didn't shout, I said. That's most of handling, he said. We shook hands and I watched him walk to his car, the modest sedan of a man who has never needed to prove himself with chrome. Jason and Megan drove off in separate directions as if a compass had finally admitted it had more than one answer. I stayed a moment longer in the parking lot, the salt crunching under my boots, and then I drove home the long way past the church Joyce attends, past the post office where Helen insisted on buying stamps in person, because machines don't need to know our business, past the elementary school where Lily once lost a mitten and found a friend. Back at the house, the light through the south window had settled into that steady afternoon square that makes everything look honest, whether it wants to or not. I hung my coat on the peg. The radiator clicked once as if to confirm we had come through the morning. I went to Helen's office and pulled the drawer, the navy envelope, the brass key on its red ribbon, the shoebox of postcards that smelled faintly of salt and paper that had traveled farther than any speech. I set them on the blotter in a line. I called Thomas and left a message. Thank you. Consider this phase complete. Stand by for mail from Lisbon. Then I dialed a number I had written in small, careful figures on the back of the last postcard. It rang longer than American phones ring, like the sound had to cross a wide room filled with white walls and bowls of lemons before it reached a person. When Maria answered, her voice arrived as if it had known mine already. "Senor Whitaker," she said. "This is Earl," I said. "Call me Earl." "Earl," she repeated, and made the word sound less like a name and more like a place. "We're ready," I said. "The house here will hold for now." The other house, I glanced at the key. "I think it's time to see it. There will be clean sheets," she said, as if answers were best given in linen. "And a window you will open without thinking. And the door you have the key." "I do." "Good," she said. "Then you will let yourself in. That is how a man becomes himself again in a foreign place." We agreed on nothing elaborate. A date, a time, the advice of a person who has ferried other people's grief across a small stretch of sea and learned which currents lie. When we hung up, I stood in the middle of the office and let the house hear me say, "Soon." On the kitchen table, I opened the legal pad to my rules and added a line, 10 if they try to move you like furniture change rooms on your terms. I made a sandwich that tasted better than it deserved, and I ate it at the counter with the back door cracked an inch because Helen liked winter air to be part of honest meals. The lake still held its ice, but there was a dark seam cutting toward the dock, a line where thaw rehearses. I remembered the sound it would make in April, the deep, almost animal groan of water remembering itself. I hoped to be here for it. And I hoped in a way that didn't feel like asking too much to hear a different water in a different place make its case for spring. Around 3, Joyce knocked the back-of-hand courtesy of a neighbor who keeps your dignity in her pocket with her house keys. She handed me an envelope with a smudge of blue ink on the flap. "This came to my box by accident," she said. "I told Harold if the post office insists on rearranging the street, I'll rearrange their sense of humor." She peered past me into the kitchen. "How'd it go?" "Like a bridge inspection," I said. "Found the rust, scraped it, sealed the beam." She nodded satisfied, as if I'd said pie cooled properly. Then she looked at the key on the table. "That new old," I said, "new to me." "Where's it go?" "A door that knows my name," I said, and she smiled like a woman who keeps her curiosity under a quilt until the time is right. When she'd gone, I called Lily. She answered from a campus hallway that echoes. "Hi, Grandpa." "Hey, Lily," I said. "How are your curves still apologizing?" She laughed. "Less. I told them to mind their business." "Good. Listen," I said. "How do you feel about learning how different water smells?" "You're taking me somewhere," she said, not asking. "I am," I said. "Soon. Somewhere your grandmother stashed a piece of our life." Silence. Then the sound of a young person's happiness finding its feet. "Where I'll tell you when I buy the tickets," I said. "For now, practice saying thank you in a language you don't speak yet." She squealed, which is the only rightful sound some news earns. "Mom will." "Practice," I said gently. She sent me a picture of the blue scarf. "She's trying." Lily exhaled a softer, deeper sound. "You sound lighter," she said. "I am," I said. "Paper has done some of the heavy lifting. Grandma would be smirking right now," she said. "She would," I said. "She'd pretend not to be proud of me for making a list, and then she'd steal my pen. We said goodbye the way you do when you're walking towards something together, even if you're in different towns." After the call, I stood at the window again. The seam in the ice had widened. A crow hopped along the shore with the purposeful indecision of creatures who trust their instincts more than their maps. Evening found its way over the ridge. I lit the fire, poured a finger of the scotch Helen had told me to save for when the thing you were hoping would work works. I held it in my mouth and let it teach the cold a short lesson. In the light from the hearth, I opened Helen's letter again. The line about foundations stared up at me. Foundations don't beg to be kept. They decide what gets to stay. I thought about the county conference room, the way fluorescent light made everyone more honest than they wanted to be. I thought about Jason's jaw, Megan's folder closing, and Jeff's polished concessions. I thought about Thomas's pen 1 inch from the pad and how many men like me had found their spines again on the strength of a sentence that sounded boring on paper and felt like granite underfoot. When the flames laddered down to coals, I got up and did the small work of a life, set the kettle to boil for the night bottle, rinsed the coffee pot, laid my keys in the cracked ceramic bowl on the console table where they have lived as long as the bowl has tolerated them. I touched the brass key with the red ribbon and left it there on the table, not hidden, not displayed. The house knew it. I wanted to know the house. Before bed, I wrote a short note in my square hand and left it on the kitchen table where Sunday sits, Sunday. 2:00. Pie. Then beneath it, smaller soon tickets. I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, the second from top stair, complaining under my left foot more than my right, as always. In the bedroom, I stood a moment in the doorway and listened to the quiet. Houses earn their quiet. It should be paid attention to. I lay down on the side where I sleep now and put my hand where Helen slept. Then the linen cool, the absence not theatrical. Geography still. I slept. I dreamt of 2 doors, one old, one new, both open without me having to push. When I woke, the light through the south window was clean. The lake's seam had split an inch. The house was warm. My name and my voice sounded decisive. And somewhere far from Vermont, a woman named Maria was opening windows in a white house with blue shutters, saying into the empty air the English word for welcome, as if it were a prayer you could fold and carry in your pocket to use when you needed to remember how to be a man who chooses his rooms. Airports are designed to make you feel interchangeable. That's their trick, their mercy, their insult, rows of bodies funneling toward gates, each of us with a number stapled to a time. I wore the same black coat I'd worn to Helen's funeral, not because I needed it where I was going, but because I needed it in the space between. In the security line, a boy ahead of me clutched a stuffed whale with the loose confidence of the very young and the very old. His mother bent down and told him the whale had its ticket. He believed her. I wanted to. I packed light. 1 suitcase, a folder with copies of papers Thomas had insisted on, the deed to the lake house, the cease and desist letters, and a letter authorizing him to sign for me while I was out of the country. Into the inside pocket of my coat, I slipped Helen's navy envelope and the brass key on its red ribbon, not for utility, for gravity. At the gate, I took the aisle seat. I used to take the window when Helen traveled with me. She liked the horizon under her, the math of fields squared into obedience, and the tilt of rivers that refused to be organized. Alone, the aisle feels honest. The small freedom to stand when blood tells you you've been pretending to be a statue too long. The plane pushed back, paused on the apron as if it needed to remember how to insist, then turned toward the runway. Wheels up. Vermont flattened under us into a patchwork of winter's decisions. I closed my eyes and took inventory the way I learned to do on long job sites, the mental walkthrough of a project's edges. House in order. Notices sent. Jason is contained by the kind of paper that matters. Megan is practicing a kind of softness that might eventually turn into trust. Lily's text the night before, teach me to say thank you in Portuguese, saved and reread and saved again. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the cabin lights dimmed. The plane became a congregation. Faint hum, the click of plastic cups against trays, the quiet of people consenting to be carried by machines they don't understand. I slept, and when I dreamed, it was not dramatic. A bowl of lemons on a table in a room that smelled like sun-warmed wood, a window left open on purpose. Someone was humming a song I didn't recognize and didn't need to. We landed in light. Faro exists on approach like a promise kept by other people. Square white houses, terracotta roofs, a slice of sea lay flat with the kind of confidence only water can manage. The passport officer stamped me in with the cool efficiency of a person trained to trust the shape of a book. "Bem-vindo," he said. "Welcome." Outside arrivals, a woman stood with a piece of paper that had my name printed in block letters like she'd wanted to make sure the air got it right. Earl Whitaker. Maria Duarte. She was smaller than I expected, with the posture of someone who carries other people's days without letting them slip. Her hair was tucked into a knot. Her mouth held the kind of smile that says, "I am not here to entertain you, but I am glad you came." "Senor Whitaker," she said, then corrected herself. "Earl." The way she said my name made it sound less like a label and more like coordinates. She stepped forward and hugged me, not the American pat on the back that announces itself as not a hug. A simple placing of arms around shoulders, a brief press then done. Her sweater smelled like oranges and laundry. "You have traveled," she said, as if the verb were sufficient evidence. "Come, the car is not far." In the lot her car waited in the kind of shade that only a country with real sun remembers to offer. A small hatchback the color of a sky that is making up its mind. She drove like a person who respects the road more than the horn. The highway unfolded simple low hills, a spine of eucalyptus flashes of blue where the world remembers its edge. Maria pointed with her chin more than her finger. "Panaderia," she said as we passed a squat building with a hand-painted sign, a bakery. Good bread, honest butter, a fishmonger, a pharmacy she promised I wouldn't need. The word for lemons limos arrived in her mouth like something that had never betrayed anyone. We turned off the main road onto one that narrowed until it became a conversation, stone walls on either side, a braiding of purple bougainvillea olive trees that looked older than our laws. The air changed, less motor, more leaf. A stray cat considered us chose forgiveness. Here Maria said, easing the car into a spot that had learned her tires. "Your house." She didn't say the house. She said your. The difference mattered. White walls that made other colors honest. Blue shutters that made the light choose where to go. A roof of red tile holding its own in weather that had opinions. It was smaller than our Vermont place and more sure of itself. The front door was wood darkened by hands. Maria paused before it took the brass key from around her neck, the twin of mine, and placed it into my palm. "Helen wanted you to do this," she said, "with your hand." The key was warm from her skin, heavier than it looked. I set the red ribbon on my wrist so I wouldn't think of it as jewelry. The lock received it like a bone returning to its joint. The door opened without protest. Someone had kept the hinges honest. The first breath of the place smelled like lemon oil, and the sea hiding its salt in the air. Light pooled on the terracotta floor like it had been poured, not painted. The living area was one good room, a couch the color of sand, a low wood table with soft edges like it had been rounded by years of knees, and good conversation built-in shelves with books that had traveled languages to sit here. The kitchen was tiled in a pattern that had learned to be cheerful without performance. Copper pots hung above the stove, not as props but as tools waiting for their hour. On the counter a bowl, lemons, of course. Maria moved through the space like a person who refuses to turn care into ceremony. "Linens," she said, opening a door to a closet where sheets breathed sunlight. The plumber, she tapped a card on the fridge, reliable. The electrician is not unreliable. Her smile carried a history of repaired wires. She stopped by the window above the sink, pushed it open with 2 fingers. The sound the hinges made was almost a word. The air changed again, sea basil from a pot on the sill, the metallic whisper of a town not pretending to be a city. She turned to me, the look of someone passing a test they wrote for themselves. "Yes," she said simply, as if to bless the room. I put my suitcase down by the doorway and stood there without moving for a full minute. There are rooms you enter the way you take shelter, and rooms you enter the way you return a book to a library. This was the second kind. We did a short tour. 2 bedrooms, one facing a narrow lane where a motorbike would pass once an hour and make you feel included, the other facing a small courtyard with a lemon tree that had been domesticated without losing its voice. A bathroom with tile that remembers water like a good friend, remembers your worst day, and loves you anyway. On the table by the bed, a photo in a small frame, Helen and Maria arms, slung over each other's shoulders like people who had learned the same lesson at different times and didn't mind admitting it. Maria watched me see it. "Your Helen came once," she said, before anyone knew she was sick. She brought a notebook and asked questions in English, and then in a kind of Portuguese that was only brave vowels. She laughed softly. I told her she should not apologize for the way she learned. She said she would not. I sat on the small bench by the bedroom window. Maria sat on the chair opposite, not across a distance, but across a shared understanding. "I owe Helen," she said. "I owe her more than houses can carry. She helped me, how do you say, file a name correctly." She tapped 2 fingers over her heart. There were papers that said, "I was not me." She corrected them. She stayed until the woman in the office knew me better than I knew myself. Not because she is rude, she is not rude. Maria's English sometimes tripped on the present tense, sometimes not. The meaning never stumbled. She made a space where my name could be its own house. So yes, I owed her. Now I do not owe. I keep. There are moments when thanks would be an insult because the gratitude is too big for the word. I held my tongue and nodded. Maria nodded back, a gesture of respect. She stood. I leave you at your house, she said. It is yours to be quiet in. Do not be polite. Sit wherever your body says yes. At the door she paused, glanced down at the red ribbon on my wrist. Good, she said. You will not lose it. Keys deserve wrists. Alone. I stood in the kitchen and did the simple work of belonging. Washed my hands, opened a cabinet and approved of the bowls, opened the fridge milk, eggs, butter, a small note in Maria's hand. There is always bread in the drawer. There was dark crust, clean crumb. I cut a slice and ate it with nothing. It tasted like a memory I hadn't made yet. On the terrace, the iron rail was painted a blue that could have been named A Decision You Don't Regret. The sea lay beyond the low roofs of a dozen houses and made the sound oceans make when they are not asked to be dramatic. I sat at the small table and rolled a lemon under my palm. The scent rose not politely. I thought of Helen in Vermont rolling a lemon before cutting it, telling Lily that it wakes the juice without wounding it. I cut into the skin with the dull knife Maria had left to keep me honest and let the air become a letter I could finally read. I slept. Not because I was tired, but because this place made sleep feel like a choice you make to participate. When I woke, the light had moved just enough to make new shadows. Not better, not worse, just different. I took the folder to the table and spread out papers like maps. The deed. The notary letter. A draft from a Lisbon attorney whose English was fine and whose signature was beautiful. At the bottom of the packet, a single page, caretaker authorization naming Maria as the person who could call the plumber without asking my permission contract. A mason accept a delivery. Pay a small bill when I was elsewhere. I signed where a small sticker told me to sign. The pen behaved. We did not open a bottle to celebrate. We opened windows. At dusk, Maria returned, not a hostess, but a neighbor, with good instincts. She carried a bag with a corked bottle of something she promised wouldn't make me regret tomorrow, and 2 small paper sacks steaming at the top. Sopa, she said. And bread again. Bread is boring in the way a chair is boring trustworthy. Sit. We ate at the small table by the open window. The soup tasted like someone's grandmother had been right about everything. The wine admitted it was young and did not try to be older. Maria told me where to buy tomatoes without being flirted with. I told her about a lake that needed to remember it was water again. She asked about Lily with the kind of interest that has dignity. I told her about the scarf Megan had worn. I told her about Jason's jaw and how a man can build a life on wanting and then declare himself surprised when the bill arrives. Maria listened without trying to fix. She took 1 sip of wine with her head slightly tilted as if waiting for honesty. Children, she said, finally do not like it when parents change the story. She lifted a shoulder. But stories change or they break. Your wife knew that. She glanced at the photo again. She was good at deciding what could be cut and what must be kept. We washed the 2 bowls with water that seemed to come from a polite place. Maria dried while I put things away where my hands wanted them to live, not where logic insisted. Tomorrow, she said, you walk. There is a market. You buy 3 things you do not need and 1 thing you do. This is how you teach your body new maps. At the door, she tapped the key on my wrist. Sleep. Leave the window open. The air here likes to learn faces. After she left, I stood at the sink in the dark, listening. Distant laughter that didn't require me to participate. A scooter passing like a thought someone decided not to say out loud. A soft clink from a neighbor's kitchen that meant someone set a cup down and accepted their evening. I dreamed again of a lemon, but this time it was already cut and someone had removed the seeds for me. In the morning, I woke before the light finished deciding how to arrive. Made coffee in a metal pot that asked you to pay attention. The first sip tasted like patience. I took the mug to the terrace and watched the lane yawn awake, a man hosing down a stoop with the kind of care you usually reserve for crib mattresses. A woman sweeping a small square of shared space with devotion. A boy tying his shoes and then retying them because the first knot hadn't felt like a plan. I walked to the market with a cotton bag Maria had hung on a hook by the door, the words of a grocery store on it in a font that asked you not to take it too seriously. The market was what markets are, a rehearsal for how communities behave when no one is grading them. Pyramids of oranges. A fishmonger who raised a knife like a conductor's baton and declared a verdict in a language I didn't need to follow to trust. A man selling bowls that had been smoothed by a hand before they were fired. I bought olives, I did not need bread, I did, and a bowl I wasn't sure about until I held it. I bought a lemon because it felt faithful. On the way back, I stopped at a shop with soaps the color of honest mornings. The woman behind the counter said "Sandalo sandalwood," and I smiled before I could help myself. She wrapped a bar in paper like a teacher wraps a gift for a favorite student and nodded when I said "obrigado" like she had graded me and decided the grade would be between the two of us. At the house, I put the soap next to the sink like it had been missing all along. I put the lemon in the bowl. I put the bowl in a place where the light could find it without trying. I sat and wrote Lily a letter I did not intend to send. There are tiles here that make your feet tell the truth. There is a window that makes every breath look like mine. There is a woman who knew your grandmother well enough to correct a desk clerk with kindness. I folded the paper and slid it under the bowl like ballast. The house taught me it's afternoon. There is a moment when the sun hits the kitchen wall and turns it into a photograph of itself. There is a minute when the neighbor's laundry stops moving and you can tell the wind has gone to lunch. My phone, American Too Helpful by half, buzzed on the table. A text from Jason. "How long will you be gone?" The words carried the tone of a man trying to schedule other people's weather. I typed, "Long enough to let the house forget your plans for it." I did not hit send. Instead, I wrote, "A little while. The house is fine. See you Sunday pie when I'm back." Then I turned the phone off and put it in a drawer with rubber bands and matches where well-behaved devices belong. I took the caretaker authorization back out and ran my thumb over my signature. We were not playing at escape. We were building an addition to a life. I slipped the paper into an envelope addressed to the Lisbon attorney, and out of habit wrote the return address as if Vermont were still the center of my map. Then with a pen that did not ask permission to make marks, I crossed it out and wrote the street here. Sometimes the hand has to learn what the mind has chosen. In the late afternoon, Maria knocked with an energy that carried inside it an assumption that she would be heard. She stuck her head in before I said, "Come the way neighbors do when the boundary has been established by honesty and not by locks." "We buy beans," she said, not meaning beans, meaning coffee. "And you meet Senor Almeida, who sold fish to Helen and then pretended he did not know her because he was shy about liking Americans." We walked the lane. She kept a pace that let me learn how the pavement pinched in one place and released in another. At the cafe by the square, a man behind the counter looked up, saw Maria, and did the sort of nod men reserve for women who could ruin their day and choose not to. She introduced me in Portuguese first, then English, then in the third language of hand to heart and back. He poured coffee into cups that had seen things. He refused our money. Maria allowed it for once. "He will charge you next time," she said. "He owes her one time only." We sat. We did not talk for the first 5 minutes because good coffee asks you to submit. When we did, I asked Maria the question that had been walking next to me all day. How did she look when she came? Like a person who was not answering questions for the first time in a long time. Maria said, "Not sad, ready." We watched a child chase a pigeon and lose on purpose because the game is the point. Maria's face made the expression of someone who has spent a lifetime editing people out of their bad drafts and not been paid for it except in continuing. "She left instructions," I said, tapping the envelope in my pocket. "She left love," Maria corrected. "The instructions are there so you know how to carry it." When we walked back in the blue that lives between afternoon and evening, I felt the old ache in my leg from a job site long ago. The kind that reminds you that muscle learns truth the hard way and never forgets. I did not resent it. I let the ache pass as rent. At the house, I stood at the terrace railing and watched the sea lose color with dignity. A neighbor coughed. A dog made a sound like agreement. Somewhere a pan touched a stove. The night performed its small sounds and then honored its promise to be quiet. On the table by the door, the brass key caught one last edge of sun and gave it back to the room. I picked it up without thinking, felt the weight, and put it down where my hand would find it tomorrow without looking. That is the trick of arrival, to move the things you need into the arc of your reach and allow the old reach to rest. Before bed, I wrote to Thomas Paper, moving. Caretaker appointed. I'll be out of pocket for a few days. If Jason calls, tell him I'm where his mother taught me to be. I wrote to Joyce, will you water the basil? The plant likes you better. I wrote the word Lily on a card and left it blank because I wanted to give her the first page when I saw her in person and not give the moment to a stamp. In the dark in a bed that did not yet know me and was kind enough not to pretend otherwise, I listened to a small clink from the kitchen. A bowl is settling. A lemon, deciding where it would rest for the night. My heart did not race. It kept its honest pace. I slept the way houses sleep when no one is trying to sell them. Morning would bring other work paper at the post office, a walk to the edge of town where the cliff lets you see the water admit its depth. A call to Lily at a decent hour to say, only bring a sweater you can forgive for being wrong in a new wind. But for now, the key on the table, the windows open 2 inches, and the sea crooning about nothing in particular were sufficient proof. I had crossed. Not an ocean, though, that was true, a threshold. And I was for the first time in months not rehearsing my next sentence. I was speaking it. In the days after Maria handed me the brass key, and I began to understand what Helen had left me, a different kind of thought began to take root. The lake house in Vermont, the small home here in Madeira, those were tangible, solid. But there was something else I carried, the municipal bonds Helen and I had bought quietly over decades, the sort of investment you never brag about because it grows best in silence. They had always been intended for the future, though we had never named whose. For years, future meant both Jason and Megan, and perhaps their children. But the years had a way of clarifying who you could trust with what. And lately, my definition of future had narrowed to one person, Lily Carter, my granddaughter. She was 20 now, still with the sharp edges of someone who hasn't yet been sanded down by the compromises adults call wisdom. But she had Helen's way of looking at a place and seeing not just what it was, but what it could be. The summer she turned 16, she stood barefoot on the deck of the lake house and told me the old boathouse could be turned into an art studio. She had drawn the plans in a notebook, scaling them herself, the measurements annotated in the neat script of someone who wanted to be taken seriously. She didn't know I had saved that notebook in my desk. It was Lily, not Jason or Megan, who had stayed behind after Helen's funeral to help me fold the tablecloths, who asked if she could take home the vase with the chip in it because it felt like it still belonged in the family. And it was Lily who, without realizing it, had shown me the difference between inheritance as entitlement and inheritance as stewardship. The more I thought about it, the more I knew I had to act while I still had the will and the clarity to do it. The lawyer in Lisbon was a man named Duarte Ramos, unrelated to Maria, though he greeted me as if we'd known each other since boyhood. His office was on the 2nd floor of a pale yellow building with a balcony that overlooked a street lined with jacaranda trees. When the wind moved, the blossoms fell like purple rain onto the cobblestones below. I took it as a good omen. I understand you wish to establish a trust, he said, switching to careful English after I stumbled over my first sentence in Portuguese. Tell me how you imagine it. I told him it was for Lily alone, not for Jason, not for Megan. I wanted her to have enough to start anywhere she chose, a business, a degree, a home, but I wanted to shield it from the grasping hands of parents who might see it as a lifeline for their own mistakes. He nodded slowly as if this request was not new to him. We can make this very specific, he said. The conditions, they will be binding. No one can change them except you, and only while you are alive. Good, I said. That's the point. We spent 2 hours shaping the document. Condition 1. The funds could not be used to settle debts or loans of any other family member. Condition 2. Any withdrawal above a certain amount would require her to present a plan, academic, professional, or creative, and the trustee would decide if it met the terms. Condition 3. No one but Lily and the trustee would know the exact value of the trust. Why keep the amount secret, Duarte asked. Because knowing too much can crush a person before it frees them, I said. If she believes it's limitless, she might not learn to build anything herself. If she thinks it's too small, she might never risk starting. Better she just knows it's enough. He smiled in that way lawyers do when they find a clause that is more human than legal. That evening I sat at the small terrace table in the Madeira house looking out over the rooftops toward the line where the ocean met the sky. The red ribbon with Helen's key was still looped around my wrist. I rolled a lemon under my palm not to wake the juice but to keep my hands moving while my mind wandered. I imagined Lily opening a letter from the trustee one day, perhaps 5 or 10 years from now, and realizing that her grandfather had trusted her in a way no one else had. Not trusted her to be good, but trusted her to be bold. There's a difference. Helen would have approved. As I thought about it, I began to suspect she had been planting this seed for years. The bonds were her idea to begin with, and she was the one who insisted we keep them separate from the accounts the kids knew about. For when the world gets small, she'd said once, you'll want something that can open it again for the right person. The next morning I walked to the post office in town. It was a narrow building with a brass bell on the door that chimed like a polite throat clearing when you entered. I mailed a packet of signed documents back to Duarte. Inside the envelope, the official trust papers, my authorization, and a handwritten letter to Lily sealed in its own smaller envelope marked, "To be delivered when the time is right." I didn't say in the letter how much the trust was worth. I wrote instead about the time she and Helen and I had driven to a beach on Lake Champlain, and she had spent 2 hours building a driftwood sculpture no one else would ever see. I told her that sometimes the things you build in private are the ones that hold up longest. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a kind of quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with repair. That afternoon I called Lily. The time difference meant she was in the middle of her morning classes. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright but slightly out of breath. "Grandpa, are you okay?" "Better than okay," I said. "I'm somewhere warm drinking coffee that could make a man believe in second chances." She laughed. "That sounds dangerous. Where are you?" "In a place your grandmother wanted me to see. Maybe one day I'll show you." "You mean like, bring me there?" she asked, half joking. "Exactly like that," I said. And I meant it. We talked about her architecture project, a redesign of a public library that would make better use of natural light. I thought of telling her she'd have the means to build something like it one day. But I held back. Timing. Helen always said is the difference between a gift and a burden. Before we hung up, she said, "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" "Always. When Mom and Uncle Jason talk about you, they don't sound like they're talking about the same person I know. It's like they have a different version." I felt the words like a small stone in my chest. People see what they want to see, Lily, and sometimes they need you to play a certain part in their story. That doesn't mean it's who you are. She was quiet for a moment. "I like your version better." When I hung up, I stood for a long time at the terrace rail, the phone still in my hand, the sea stretching out in front of me like a promise I intended to keep. The twist, if you could call it that, came later that week. I received an email from Duarte confirming the trust had been established, but also noting that someone he didn't say who had inquired about my financial holdings back in Vermont. I assured them, he wrote, that such matters are private. I didn't need to guess twice. Jason had always underestimated how many ways there are to build walls that can't be climbed. He would find out soon enough that Lily's future was no longer something he could mortgage in advance. I closed the email, the sound of the sea filling the room, and thought of Helen's words. "When they think you have nothing, you're free to give to whoever you choose." And I had chosen. 2 days before Lily landed, I bought a second mug. Not because there wasn't already one in the cupboard. There were 3 each with a different chip that told you they had been loved by someone who believed in hard counters, but because there's a mercy in setting a place for a person before they arrive. The mug was plain white. On the walk back from the square, I almost chose one with blue flowers, then heard Helen laugh in my head. "Don't decorate the welcome. Let the person do that." I spent the morning rehearsing the small paths my feet would take with Lily in the house. 2 cups to the terrace. The window latch that prefers a left-leaning thumb. The good light at the end of the hallway where faces tell the truth. It's not that I expected to manage her day like a stagehand. I just wanted the house to know how to make room for her without fuss. Maria knocked at noon with that 3-beat rhythm I'd come to recognize. "I'm here. I'm outside. Don't hurry." She poked her head in and held up a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and twine. "For the girl," she said, not handing it to me yet, as if objects should have the right to choose their moment. "From your Helen." The parcel was light, flat like a notebook. Maria kept her hand on it a second longer than necessary and then released it into mine with a care usually reserved for fragile fruit. "She gave me that a long time ago," Maria said. She said, "One day when Earl has stopped trying to carry everything, give this to Lily, not before." Maria's eyes softened. You have stopped, I think. Enough, I said. She nodded an agreement signed without paper. And the girl, curious, I said, brave in the way that doesn't advertise itself. She'll try to be careful and fail, and it will save her. Good, Maria said. Careful breaks more things than clumsy ever did. We left the parcel on the console table by the door the way you leave bread to breathe. I texted Lily our plan for the next day airport coffee and a walk that would pretend not to be a tour. She sent back a string of airplane emojis she would have mocked herself for a year ago. That night, I couldn't sleep, not with the weather. Some inland wind had decided the coast had become too proud, and not with the anticipation that has lived under my skin since my 30s, the kind that used to show up before a big pour on a bridge job. I got up, made tea, and wrote Lily's name on a card I'd been saving for nothing important. Then I didn't write anything else. Some pages deserve a first sentence spoken aloud. At the airport, I stood with the little sign Maria had teased me into making. Lily. The letters looked like they'd been written by a man who cared too much about straight lines. When she appeared, hair pulled back, the kind of backpack that admits it won't manage her life, she scanned the crowd with that family squint we all inherited from some ancestor who distrusted thresholds. When she saw her name, she smiled with mercy. Grandpa, she said into my coat. Hey, kid, I said into her hair, which smelled like hotel soap and breath mints. On the drive back, I let Lily narrate the horizon the way 20-year-olds do when geography finally stops being a map and starts being a rumor they can confirm. She pointed at the orange groves, asked if the stone walls were old or just pretending, and wanted to know if everyone here understood they lived at an angle to the rest of the world. Maria was waiting at the house, leaning against the door frame like a subtitle. She hugged Lily quickly the way women who own their time do. Menina, she said, a little Portuguese caress of a word I didn't know she had in her pocket. Welcome home. We didn't show Lily everything at once. You don't turn on all the lights for a person. You let them discover which switch belongs to their hand. She put her bag in the smaller bedroom and immediately moved the chair 2 inches. The room improved. She stepped onto the terrace and let the sea introduce itself without commentary. When she finally noticed the brown paper parcel on the console table, she put her hand on it and looked at me for permission she didn't need. From your grandmother, I said, according to a schedule that wasn't mine. She sat at the table with the parcel in front of her like a patient. She untied the twine slowly because some knots are part of the message. Inside was a slim notebook, the kind Helen loved, black cover corners rounded from being carried. On the first page, Helen's square hand. Lily. If Maria has given this to you, it means your grandfather has done something brave. Brave looks boring most days. Keys papers saying no at the right volume. Boring is faithful. This notebook lived with me when I was learning to leave good things behind without losing them. You will have to do that more than once in your life. Write down the names of the things you refuse to shrink for other people. Also, the lemon should be rolled before cutting. People too. Love, Grandma. Lily didn't try to be stoic. She cried the way honest people cry, quietly, like someone opening a window. She put her fingers to the ink as if heat might still be hiding under it. Then she turned the page and found more lists in Helen's hand. Not commandments, just small field notes from a life that refused performance. Don't buy shoes that apologize for your day. If a man raises his voice to make a point, tell him his point is lonely. Plant rosemary where you can brush against it accidentally. When you let someone love you, insist they learn your grandparents' names. Lily laughed at that half-laugh, half-gasp. She was ruthless, she said, reverent. She was accurate, I said. We spent the afternoon not doing much. That's my favorite kind of afternoon. Lily took the notebook out to the terrace and wrote something I didn't ask to read. Maria showed up with fish wrapped in paper and declared that today was the day Lily would meet the man who sold it to Helen and pretended he didn't like Americans. We walked to the square like locals who'd been handed a script that only said walk. At the cafe, the owner nodded at me with the pleased suspicion of a man whose coffee had been respected. He said something to Lily that I didn't catch. She answered in English first, then with a look at Maria tried the Portuguese. Obrigada. It sat well in her mouth. The fishmonger, a man with a mustache who believed in his authority, leaned on his counter and told a story involving a storm, a boat engine, and a certain American woman who had insisted on paying in exact change because paper should always be precise. Lily smiled like a student who had been permitted to cheat by the smartest girl in class. That evening, after plates were washed and the house had made its pleased hum, Lily brought the notebook to the table and tapped a page with her pen. "Can I read you something?" she asked. "Always," I said. "It's short," she said, apologizing to the air that didn't mind. She read, "What I refuse to shrink for my curiosity, the way I laugh when I snort the size of the project I'm not qualified for yet, and the part of me that wants to leave when a room starts measuring me like furniture." She looked up, waited for correction. I raised my hands. "Looks complete to me. I'm thinking," she said, as if thinking were something she had to confess about a semester abroad. "Lisbon has a program. My advisor says I'd be an idiot not to apply. I told her I can be an idiot, or I can be brave, but I can't be both at the same time." She grinned. She said, "Yes, you can. It's called being 20. "What does the brave version choose?" I asked. She looked toward the dark water. "To stay, here, close, to you." I had prepared for this conversation without admitting it. I had thought about logistics and forms and the way bureaucracies think young people are furniture you can move with labels. I'd considered the trust, the conditions, the American habits of turning gifts into surveillance. I had not prepared for the feeling that rose in my chest now, something like relief marrying something like fear and calling it a truce. "You'll have to argue with your mother," I said gently. "I've been practicing," she said, and her face made the exact shape Helen's did when she decided to be kind after. "She'll say I'm running away. I'll tell her I'm running toward. She'll say she can't help you here," I said. "She can't help me there either," Lily said, not cruel, just true. "She can love me from anywhere. That part's portable." We let the idea sit between us like a bowl of fruit. You don't eat it all at once. You choose the ripest and let the rest announce themselves. Before bed, Lily texted her mother, "Thinking of applying for Lisbon. Don't freak out, we'll call tomorrow." Then she took a photo of the notebook's first page and sent it with no caption. Megan replied with a heart and a question mark, and then 5 minutes later, just the heart. Progress is sometimes that small. In the morning I made coffee. Lily emerged in my sweater because hers was too honest with the wind. She stood by the window and read aloud from Helen's lists, "Learn to say no the way you say your name without apology." Then she turned to me and said it. No. The word was softer than it would be in a courtroom. Better. We spent the day building the small architecture of her semester emails to advisors' forms downloaded and printed so we could write on them with pens. A visit to the university office where a woman named Beatrice had decided long ago to save her kindness for people who didn't ask too many questions. Lily did the talking. I watched her learn how to be taken seriously in a language that didn't yield easily. Watching someone become themselves is better than television. That afternoon, Maria knocked with her almost music and carried in a small tin. From Senor Almeida's wife, she said, "Cookies for brave decisions." Lily laughed and ate one before asking permission. Good. On the terrace, Lily opened the notebook to a blank page and outlined a street she'd walked only once. Arches, gutters, the way light bends around a corner at 4 o'clock. She bled ink through the page because the pen didn't have the decency to keep secrets. "I'll get better paper," she said. "Later." "You'll get better at using bad paper," I said. She tilted her head. "Like you in this." She waved her hand around the kitchen, the terrace, the town. "Using what's here instead of needing more." "Like your grandmother," I said. "She built more rooms with lists and lemons than most people manage with permits." As if summoned by the word, the wind carried the smell of citrus from the neighbor's kitchen. Lily grinned and rolled a lemon under her palm until the house had opinions again. That evening we called Megan. No video at Lily's request. "She'll try to read my face," she said. "Let her read my voice." When Megan answered, she sounded tired in that way professional women do when the day has decided to be a test. "Hi, Mom," Lily said. "I'm in Portugal." I know Megan said, a small smile audible. Your grandfather texted a picture of a lemon and then 3 dots like he forgot how to finish a sentence. We kept it easy for a minute. Whether Coffee the neighbor's dog that believes it owns the lane. Then Lily inhaled. "I want to apply for Lisbon, a semester. Maybe more if it works." Megan didn't protest immediately, which is kind of yes. "Is this about running away from your studio, from the pressure?" "It's about running toward better pressure," Lily said, "toward architecture that was built before my great-great-grandparents learned to be disappointed." Megan made a small sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't a gasp. "You're your grandmother's granddaughter." "I know," Lily said. "I'm hoping it's genetic enough to keep me from being your daughter in the wrong ways." There was a silence that tried to be awkward and failed. Megan said, "I don't want you to leave because I'm afraid you won't need me." "I will need you," Lily said. "Just not for the things you want to be needed for." "That's fair," Megan said, and the sentence made a shape I hadn't heard from her in years. "Will you send me the application deadlines? I want to see the calendar. Do not control it. See it." Lily's eyes shone. "Yes." Then she added, reckless and precise, "And I'm staying here for a few weeks. With Grandpa. I want to learn the light." Megan took a breath. I respected it. "Okay," she said. "Practice the word for no. You'll need it, especially with men who think they're the first to discover you." "I've been practicing," Lily said, glancing at me. "Grandpa's a brutal coach." After the call, Lily let herself cry a little. Not grief. Relief. We sat on the step outside the door, the tile warm, the air making a case for evening. She put her head on my shoulder and said, "She's better when you're a continent away. She's better when I stop being the version of me she can negotiate," I said. We went inside when the mosquitoes began their auditions. Lily curled into the small couch and read more of the notebook. She stopped at a page where Helen had drawn a lemon half with a heart labeled pith and wrote, "Don't apologize for the part that tastes bitter first. It's what keeps you whole." She was showing off, Lily said. "She wanted you to forgive your bitterness," I said. "And mine." That night, after Lily fell asleep with the book open on her chest, I sat at the table and wrote a letter to the trustee in Lisbon. Applicant intends a semester at Universidade de Lisboa. Funds to cover tuition, housing, and living. Disbursements in planned tranches. Do not disclose value. I added one more line that had nothing to do with money. Applicant has the right posture for old doors. I slid the letter into an envelope and left it next to Maria's cookies like a bribe to the morning. The twist when it arrived did not feel like a twist. It felt like a correction. An email from Thomas waited when I turned my American phone on for the first time that week. FYI, Jason's counsel inquired clumsily about inter vivos transfers to descendants. I replied politely that your estate planning is your business. Also, the county clerk confirms a certain letter of intent has lost its appetite. Good fishing where you are. T. I laughed alone in the kitchen at a lawyer's joke that had taken him 40 years to earn. Jason would be furious first privately, then performatively. Megan would be torn between loyalty to her brother's old scripts and the new page she'd seen today. Neither of them could touch what had just been built for Lily. Not because it was hidden, though it was, but because it had the one kind of protection adult children understand, eventually Grandma's handwriting. I carried the notebook to the terrace and set it under the bowl so the breeze wouldn't pretend to be a thief. I looked up at the dark between stars and thought of all the times I had tried to keep my family safe by being tireless. Helen had chosen a quieter way. She'd built a map and then hidden it in places people would only find if they were already walking in the right direction. When I came back inside, Lily had turned in her sleep and placed a hand on the blank page as if claiming it. I turned off the lamp and let the room accept us. The house doesn't need thanks for doing what houses do. It needs inhabitants willing to be changed by it. Morning again, and the Portuguese grandfather clock on the neighbor's wall announced it would not be ignored. Lily padded into the kitchen in bare feet, the notebook tucked beneath her arm. She poured coffee like a person who had decided to be older for an hour and then younger for the rest of the day. I wrote Mom, she said. Told her the deadlines. Told her I'll send the essay when I like it. When you like it, I repeated. Not when she does. She'll like it, Lily said. She'll tell me it's missing something and I'll say, it's missing you, on purpose. She'll laugh. We'll survive it. She set the notebook on the table and flipped to a page where she had written 3 columns in a hand that looked like mine when I was 25 and didn't know I was deciding the rest of my life. Keep, let go, build. Under keep. Grandpa's lists, the smell after the terrace gets washed, the way Maria says good. Under let go, the habit of apologizing before I ask the way boys look at my work like it will eventually become theirs. Under build, Arch's letters to future me, a map of everywhere I can go with enough. Enough. The word I had promised her without teaching her its number. We walked to the post office with the trustee letter. Lily slid it across the counter like a small stone in a slingshot. The clerk waited as if judging an infant and stamped it with a sound that made the day official. On the way back, we stopped at the shop with the soaps and bought one for Megan Sandalwood wrapped in paper tied with a string. "She'll get it," Lily said. "She'll smell it and not know why she misses Grandma less and loves her more." Back at the house, Maria waited sitting on the step like a saint who takes her holiness in coffee spoons. She looked at Lily, then at me, and lifted her chin. "So she said the girl learns the word." "No," Lily said, grinning. "The other one." "Which more?" Lily spread her arms to include the sky. Maria laughed. "Good. Then you will not starve." She glanced at the notebook. "Eat first, then write." We ate bread with tomatoes that had remembered the sun too well and olives that had not learned moderation. After Lily excused herself to the terrace, she pulled her knees up under the table and wrote until the light changed its mind. I sat with Maria in the kitchen. We did not talk about the trust because some protections do their best work unmentioned. We talked instead about chairs. She told me the story of the one in her mother's house that everyone was afraid to sit in because it had belonged to a grandfather who made rules. It was the comfortable one, she said. We broke it by being careful. "I have a table like that," I said. "We kept it safe. It forgave us anyway." In the evening before the day closed its ledger, Lily came in with a sentence she wanted to test out loud. "Tell me if this is a good ending," she said, reading from the page. "I am not leaving home. Home is growing around me." I nodded, because accuracy should be rewarded. "That's not an ending," I said. "That's the first line of whatever you build next." She smiled and wrote it at the top of the next page. We washed the dishes with the window open. The night brought the kind of cool that makes a sweater an honest thing. Lily dried knives and sang nonsense, which is the best kind of rehearsal for a life that intends to be lived. Before bed, she pressed the notebook into my hands. "Read the first page again," she said, "and then give it back." On that first page, Helen's list had grown. Lily had added her line at the bottom, small, stubborn, precise. "When I grow, pull the room with me." I closed the cover and laid the book in her palm. "Your grandmother would have underlined that," I said. "She did?" Lily said, tapping her chest. "From wherever she writes now." When the house went quiet, I sat alone in the kitchen with the second mug, the one I'd bought the day before she arrived, and felt the shape of a life correct itself. There was no music, no speech, just a notebook, a lemon, a window that would be left open if the wind learned its manners. In Vermont, a lake was remembering how to be water again. In Portugal, my granddaughter was telling a city that it would have to make room. And me, an old engineer who had finally stopped measuring his worth in square footage, sat at a table and let the justice of it settle. Lily would not be smaller to make anyone comfortable. Not even me. Especially not me. Tomorrow we'd choose a bakery and pretend fidelity. We'd find a hardware store and buy a small hammer for the life she intended to build. We'd take the bus to Lisbon and get lost in a district that would teach her to ask strangers for the names of streets. She would write to her mother. Jason would send something curt. Thomas would quietly file the papers that kept our lines clean. For tonight, the notebook lay on the table like a map you don't need to fold because you already know where you're going. That was the hook I didn't know I'd been waiting for. Not revenge fulfilled, but a future that had the decency to knock. Sundays carry a particular kind of gravity where I come from. In Vermont, they make the lake look truer, like the water has taken communion. In Madeira, Sundays arrive with the kind of light that forgives last week and then minds its business. The morning after, Lily wrote, "When I grow, pull the room with me." We took our coffee to the terrace and let the day check our posture. The phone American, over-serious, was off. I turned it on because habits like old injuries ask to be acknowledged even when they no longer govern your gait. Messages rolled in like a slow tide. At the top, a photo from Jason taken in a diner I had never visited but recognized anyway by the industrial pie cabinet in the background and the insistence of laminate. A single slice of lemon meringue, the peaks imperfect, the crust fork crimped by a person who intended to be adequate. No text, just the image. I expanded the frame. A left corner caught his hand grease under the nail of a man who had fixed something over a sink without telling anyone, and the edge of a paper placemat where he'd pressed a pen too hard, drawing a rectangle. A floor plan, a small box for a room he was measuring, or just nervous ink searching for a container. For the first time in months, I didn't read it as a provocation. I read it as practice. Another message, this one from Joyce. A photo of my Vermont porch, late afternoon light. The boards wash the way we do in spring when the house needs to feel like a church again. On the step, a short vase of grocery store chrysanthemums, white as remedial hope. A card propped at the base. I am practicing. M. Megan's hand, elegant even when contrite. I took the phone inside and set it next to the bowl of lemons. Sunday has arrived, I said. Lily slid the notebook away from her plate and looked at the photos. She smiled at the pie the way young people smile when a parent's effort shows at the edges of their pride. She touched the screen where Megan's name signed itself small. Not bad, she said. Not everything, but something. We build with something, I said. Everything crumbles out of arrogance. She lifted the notebook. Keep, let go, build. She patted the bench. Your turn. We made our columns with the slow care a person gives to the first post in a fence line, the one that teaches all the others what straight means. Keep the lake house as is, as long as my hands know how to oil hinges and my knees know their way down the stairs in the dark. The rosemary hedge, both of them, the one that knows Vermont, and the one Maria brought in a clay pot and set by the door here with the grave seriousness of a midwife. The way Helen made lists sounded like good streets to live on. Let go. Explaining my boundaries, storing other people's winters, the habit of answering calls on the first ring. Build the covenant we'd spoken of and never signed the one that made paperwork protect what love had always protected without witnesses. 2 Sundays a month that belonged to pie with or without pies. A scholarship in Helen's name that did not apologize for being small. Lily printed our words in her architect's hand. What's the covenant, she asked, though she knew. Thomas will file it this week, I said. A conservation easement on the acreage around the house. Helen's garden becomes law, not sentiment. No developer can break it. No clever letter can move it. And the house itself becomes a life estate in my name, if and when I leave of my own choosing. The line of succession is not an assumption. Mom and Jason, Lily said carefully, will be invited to a table, not to a cash register, I said, if they've learned to sit. If not, the table will still be set. She drew a tiny square next to the word table and labeled it ours. She drew a lemon and labeled it yes. She drew a thin line under build and left it open for the kind of work you don't yet know to name. Maria knocked her rhythm. I'm here, I'm outside, don't hurry. She stepped in and looked at our page as if it were a map she'd walked before and didn't need to correct. She set down a paper-wrapped parcel and announced bread that forgot how to be modest. Then she glanced at my phone. America has asked for your attention, pie and flowers, I said. Ah, she said, the syllable of a person who knows that small acts are the only acts and all others are theater. Good. Then we can eat. We ate in the right order, bread first, then the olives that insist on being part of any decision, then the tangerines that break clean. Lily read a line from Helen's notebook about arranging your kitchen so that walking to the knife takes the same number of steps every day. That way, Helen had written, the days carve themselves into a groove you can return to when the world begs you to be younger than you are. Grandma never forgave the world for that, Lily said. She forgave. She didn't comply, I said. Different muscles. By midday, the heat had crept up on us the way forgiveness does, soft, and then suddenly there. Lily took the bus to the university office in town to speak with a woman named Philippa about forms that needed to be signed in blue ink because black ink had disappointed someone in 1998. Maria went to her sister's house to argue kindly about the proper size of onions. I stayed with the house, which is a way of saying I stayed with myself. I opened the email from Thomas I had been pretending to ignore. It was as dry as winter wood and twice as useful. Subject filings Earl 1. Helen Whitaker Garden Covenant recorded at the County Instrument number 241178. Permanent conservation easement, legal description attached. 2. Life estate executed, remainder interest per your instructions. 3. Notice of non-representation reissued in light of recent inquiries. 4. Your son's counsel withdrew their informal request for capacity assessment. I assume Portugal helped. Also, Joyce says the basil is thriving and that your porch looks smug. I printed the covenant because some facts want to sit heavily on a table. The legal description read like the world's most boring poem: meets and bounds, degrees and minutes, iron pins set, stones found. I traced the line with my finger, knew exactly where the paper meant the notch, where the birch gives up pretending to be big, the slope where the snow lingers when the rest of the yard has agreed to spring, the spot where Helen once decided to plant thyme because no one ever regrets a little more time. The clerk's stamp at the bottom looked like a seal of approval from an indifferent god. It comforted me anyway. Another email arrived while I was hunting for a paperclip worth trusting. This one from Jason. No subject. Dad, I don't agree with what you've done. I think you're making it harder than it needs to be. I think you like making it hard. But I watched a guy fix a cabinet hinge yesterday. Then I did the next one. It wasn't as hard as I thought. I'll be at Whitman's at 2 next Sunday. Lemon pie isn't great there. That seems like the point. I sat with that for a long minute, reading the spaces more than the letters. Jason had found a way to talk to himself without using me as a mirror. That was more than I had asked for. It was exactly what I had wanted. From Megan, a photo of the sandalwood soap on her bathroom sink, the string tied in the same knot the shopkeeper had used, because Megan is a curator even when no one is watching. The caption, "It smells like a house that doesn't need my approval." Then I told my team I'm going off-grid Sundays from 1-5. I told them it's a religion. It is. I wrote back, "Pie is a sacrament if you keep your mouth shut while you chew." She heard it and did not try to improve the line. Progress. In the afternoon, Lily returned bureaucratically triumphant. "Philippa loves stamps," she reported. She and Grandma would have gotten along rules as acts of kindness. She handed me a stack of papers flagged with colored tabs. Sign here, here, and here. Don't read the parts that were never meant to be read. Read the parts where someone bothered to be human. We signed at the table with the windows open. A breeze came through with the shamelessness of a third child. The lemon bowl let out a scent as if to say, "Fine, stay." I sealed the envelopes, and Lily wrote addresses in a hand that a postman would respect. "You have a steady line," I said. "I've been practicing," she said. "Not perfection, steadiness." We walked them to the post office because walking paper to its next life feels like paying respect. On the way, we passed the fishmonger's stall. He pretended not to see us and then gave us a discount that insulted neither party. Maria met us on the square with a bag of beans and stories about an aunt who would not be outdone by death. "She insists on living bigger because the dead cannot argue," Maria said. "I think your Helen would approve. She was good at enlarging without leaving." That night after dinner, eggs, tomatoes, bread again, because new lives do not require new recipes. We sat on the terrace and listened to the small sounds that mean a place has agreed to hold you. Lily spoke her application essay out loud and didn't ask me to fix it. She didn't have to. The sentences had already found their shoulders. "I'm not going to tell them why I deserve to be here," she said. "I'm going to tell them what I'll carry when I leave." "Take a lemon," I said. "2," she corrected. "1 for the road." My phone buzzed on the table as if it wanted to remind me of its existence. A message from the Lisbon Trustee Trust instrument complete. Disbursements are scheduled per your note. No valuation disclosed. Applicant posture appropriate. I laughed at the last line lawyers showing off and showed Lily only the sentence she needed scheduled. She nodded like a person who has learned to receive without treating gifts as debts. We turned the phones face down and let the evening take responsibility for what belonged to it. The sky lost its blueness the way people lose their temper slowly, then all at once, and then with remorse. In the dark, the town felt like a pocket that had been sewn shut and then realized it could still hold a hand. "Tell me something true about Grandpa Lily," said half teasing, half archival. "I resent the word grandpa," I said. "Then I forgive it." "Something else," she said. "I am less angry than I was, and more dangerous," I said. "Because I finally like boring power, the kind stamped in courthouses and filed by men in plain suits." "Something not about law," she said. "I am building a life that fits in 2 places," I said. "I did not know you could do that without splitting yourself." "Turns out you can if you stop auditioning." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "I like your version," she said. "Keep it." We were quiet a long time. The sea below us made its case for permanence. Somewhere a door slammed. Someone apologized, and a radio negotiated with a cook. I held the brass key without looking at it, my thumb finding the nick I had not put there. I realized then what detail had been bothering me since the first day the ribbon. Red, yes, but the knot was Helen's, not Maria's. A double half hitch with a drop of dried something that might have been lemon juice. She had tied it herself years ago on a day when the future needed a string. Grandma did that, Lily said, as if reading my mind. She did, I said. She did a lot without putting her name on it. Like this, Lily said, and tapped the notebook. There's a page at the back she left blank on purpose. We turned to the last page. It was thick, whiter than the rest, waiting. Lily handed me the pen. Write her something, she said. I started to demur. Sentimentality is a room I prefer to walk past. Then I wrote with my neat, stubborn print. Helen. The lemons are behaving. Lily is louder than she thinks and quieter than she fears. Jason can fix a hinge. Megan can turn off a phone. I can sleep. Maria guards what matters. Your garden is law now. Your lists are a city ordinance. I did not make a speech. I learned to file. Lily read it and didn't comment. The best edits arrive as silence. We closed the notebook and placed it under the bowl to teach it a weight. Inside, something settled, not the house, not the island, not the blood. The line that had stretched thin between two lives got thicker, braided with use. The days that followed knew their script without asking permission. Lily took the bus to Lisbon midweek with a backpack that had learned how to be useful. She stayed 3 nights with a student in Alfama whose windows refused to close against singing. She texted me 2 photos, a staircase that forgot symmetry on purpose and a napkin with a lemon drawn on it by a waiter who was flirting with the table, not necessarily with her. I told him I'm committed to citrus, she wrote. He said, me too. We will survive it. Megan sent her a voice memo that started to give advice and ended by recalling a night when she and Helen had sat on the Vermont porch counting satellites and pretending to know the names of constellations. Bring me a bar of soap that smells like the way you feel when you're brave, she said at the end, almost whispering. You're braver than my rules. Jason called me on a Sunday from Whitman's. He didn't put me on speaker. He didn't try to sound casual. He said lemon pie still isn't great. Then after a breath, but it's not about the pie. He told me he'd turned down a listing that would have made him money and made someone else's life smaller. I didn't want to, he admitted. I wanted the number. But I remembered your, what did you call it, boring power. So I told them to keep the house. I said I'd help them find a roofer. He laughed, surprised at himself, not smiling yet. I wrote their number down on my hand like an amateur. Then I fixed their back door because I was there. Good, I said, which in our family is the nicest thing you can say to a man who is practicing not being a boy. Thomas mailed me the recorded covenant embossed where seals are embossed. On the line labeled Description of Protected Values, he had written per my request in a hand so neat it could have been judged the rosemary hedge, the lemon tree, the path where people have learned to walk more slowly. The clerk had allowed it. The state, for once, had decided to be human. I went back to Vermont for a week in early spring to see if the dock still remembered me. It did. The lake performed its old miracle, ice cracking along a seam like a mouth unlearning a lie. Joyce watched me from her porch with the kind of ministry neighbors provide when religion fails. I stood with my hands in my coat pockets and didn't need to narrate the sound. When the last sheet of ice sighed and let go, I said out loud to no one, "There." The map folded along the right crease. On my porch, another vase, cheaper flowers, same hand. I am practicing, Megan had written again. Practicing. I realized is how people love you when they cannot yet bear to be corrected. I set the vase on the table and let it be homely and sufficient. 2 days later, before I flew back, I met Jason at Whitman's. He had grease on his cuff and didn't apologize for it. We ordered pie and ate it with the seriousness of men who understand that dessert can be work. We did not talk about the house. We did not talk about Portugal, we talked about hinges. He told me one of his deals had collapsed because a buyer decided at the last minute he wanted a house that would make his brother jealous. I said, don't buy anything to punish someone else. Jason admitted, wincing at his sermon. I heard myself and hated myself. He bought another place anyway. It'll punish him later. We paid cash. We took our time standing up. In the parking lot, he hugged me like a man who had finally found a use for his arms that didn't involve carrying only himself. See you next Sunday, he said, or the one after. Back in Madeira, Lily hit send on her application with a kind of ceremony I admired. No screenshot, no post, just a hand on the trackpad and a nod to the air. Maria held a small party that was not a party, beans and onions and bread, and a story about a priest who had tried to ban dancing from a wedding and been corrected by the mother of the groom with a spoon. The spoon survived, Maria said. So did the marriage. The letter from the university arrived in an envelope that I knew was bearing more than paper. Lily opened it in the kitchen with her mouth set like a person who values doors that open the right way. She read the first line and then put her hand on the counter the way people do when a wave lifts them. "I'm in," she said, quiet as a blessing. We didn't jump. We didn't perform. We stood still long enough for the news to settle where bodies store their promises. Then we went to the square and bought 2 pastries we didn't need, because sugar belongs to victory as salt belongs to grief. That evening I took Helen's notebook from its place under the bowl and wrote on the inside of the back cover in small print, "Justice came on foot." It asked for water, not applause. I closed the notebook and set it back where it had been doing its best work in the shade under weight at peace. The last light left the terrace like a person backing out of a room so they wouldn't make our conversation about them. Lily leaned on the rail and told me what she planned to do first in Lisbon, find the oldest door that would tolerate her and measure it without touching. "So I know where to begin," she said. Maria came by with coffee because evenings like old friends are better when they don't ask you to prove you're worth their time. We said very little and meant it. The sea below was not interested in our legal victories or our tidy narratives. It had other work pulling and pushing against a shore that had been both enemy and lover. The air smelled like a lemon surrendering in stages. My phone buzzed once more. A clip from Thomas of the county recorder's cursor blinking where my name now lived next to Helen's in a column that would outlast everyone in this room. A note from Joyce. "The basil forgives you for leaving. It prefers being watered by the old neighbor lady who knows its name." And a photo from Megan, her hand ink-smudged, crossing out a sentence in a presentation that had apologized for taking up time. Practicing, she wrote again. I wrote back, "Me too. I did not send a message to Jason. I did not need to. The hinge would do the talking in his kitchen when it opened, and did not complain." We made one more list because lists are how our family lets time pass without worrying it has forgotten us. Keep pie on Sundays, even if it is bad. Let go permission from people who love us to be smaller. Build a bench by the lemon tree here and a bench by the rosemary hedge there, places where the same body can rest without explaining why it is allowed to belong to 2 climates. When Lily went to bed, she left Helen's notebook on the table open to the page where she had written, "When I grow, pull the room with me." The house took a breath and held it for us. I turned off the light and stood for a moment with my hand on the doorframe the way men do not, because they are sentimental, but because wood deserves to know whose weight it has carried. Justice did not arrive with a flag. It did not slam a gavel. It did not look good on television. It looked like pie photos and grocery store flowers, and a signature at the bottom of a page no one will frame, and a girl speaking Portuguese with the right mistakes, and a man learning to prefer hinges to arguments. It sounded like paper sliding into a file and a key answering a lock and ice breaking itself on schedule. It felt like a table finally cleared of boxes. I went to bed in a house that knew my name in 2 languages. The brass key lay on the table within reach, but no longer necessary to touch. In Vermont, my garden had become law. In Portugal, my granddaughter had become loud where it mattered and quiet where it counted. In between, an old engineer had learned that the best bridges are the boring ones stamped inspected standing. No one praises them after the first week. No one needs to. They carry what must be carried. They don't ask to be noticed. In the dark, the sea kept its promise. It always does. And when morning came, we rolled a lemon under our palms, just enough to wake what was inside without wounding it. Then we cut and began again. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.